My name's Jack Mercer. If you told me 10 years ago I'd be teaching grade school classes to young vampires, werewolves, and other monsters, I'd have laughed in your face. Or maybe punched you, depending on how many drinks I'd had. But here we are. I'm not your average grade school teacher. My students can smell fear. Some of them breathe fire, and one kid turned his desk into an actual sentient tree monster last semester. Name's Vex. He's cool now. Mostly. So, how did I end up here? Well, that's a story. The short version is I was broke, desperate, and apparently pretty stupid. I just quit my last crappy job. My rent was overdue for the third month running, and I was one sad sandwich away from selling my motorcycle to keep the lights on. And that's when I saw the ad. Substitute needed. Patience required. Hazard pay included. Thought it was a joke or maybe a recruitment ad for some sketchy underground military thing. It even had one of those fancy fonts, the curly ones that make you think of fantasy novels. But it had a phone number, so I figured why not? Wasn't exactly swimming in options. Fast forward to me, showing up to the interview in my best and only suit, complete with a mustard stain that refused to die. I practiced my totally normal smile in the rearview mirror and walked up to the place. And let me tell you, this was not your run-of-the-mill school. Wasn't even really a building. It was a damn castle. Picture what Dracula would live in. Gargoyles perched along the walls, their creepy stone faces looking down like they were judging my life choices. Almost turn around right there, but I was too broke to be picky, so I walked up the steps and knocked on the enormous double doors. The sound echoed like I just summoned a demon, which in hindsight, well, let's just say that's not too far off. The doors creaked open, and I swear I saw shadows move where there shouldn't well have been shadows inside. The place was cavernous, all dark wood, crimson carpets, and flickering candles. The air was heavy, like it was carrying secrets. Before I could talk myself out of it, a figure stepped into view. This guy, he was tall. I mean tall, at least 6.5 feet, with a posture so straight he could balance a stack of books on his head. He had dark brown eyes and was the palest man I had ever seen. On his teeth. They were sharp enough and somehow visible even when he wasn't smiling. "You're punctual," he said. "And you're tall," I replied. To my surprise, he smiled. It wasn't a nice smile, though. It was the kind of smile that says, "I know something you don't, and you're not going to like it." "Welcome to Nightshade Institute. The students are dying to meet you," he said. Now, amongst people would have noped out of there right then, but desperate times called for desperate decisions, and my bank account wasn't exactly giving me a pep talk. So instead of running, I kind of just stared at him. My brain is doing that thing where it refuses to cooperate. "My name is Mortimer," he continued, stepping closer. "And I must say, you have beautiful eyes." "Okay," I replied, already regretting every decision that had led me to this moment. "They say the eyes are the window to the soul," Mortimer said. "Your eyes, they tell me. You're reckless. You are, aren't you?" "No comment," I replied. Mortimer smiled wider, too wide, and he began to laugh. "And you're honest. That's why I like you." Yes, there's good in those eyes. I think the children, they'll like you." And that was it. That's how I got the job. My beautiful brown eyes, I guess. I didn't sign a contract. I didn't negotiate pay. Honestly, I think I blacked out for part of the conversation. One moment I was standing in that creepy place, and the next I was in a classroom, holding a stack of lesson plans labeled Instruction to Survival Skills for Beginners. The classroom was, well, let's just say it had character. The walls were lined with bookshelves that seemed to sag under the weight of ancient tomes, their spines cracked and faded, some with titles that made my skin crawl just reading them. How to Bargain with Shadows, 101 Curses for Intermediate Hexers, and my personal favorite, So You Accidentally Summoned a Demon, Beginner's Guide. The air smelled faintly of chalk, dust, and blood. I flipped through the lesson plans in my hands. The handwriting was erratic, slashing across the page like someone wrote them while fleeing for their life. There were diagrams of traps. Some looked medieval, survival tips for escaping sentient landscapes, whatever the hell those were, and a note scrolled in the margins. Do not let them eat their brains again. Brains again. What kind of school was this? Before I could spiral too far down the rabbit hole of what have I gotten myself into, Mortimer reappeared at the doorway, his long shadow stretching into the room like it had a mind of its own. "Follow me," he said. "It's time to meet your colleagues." I followed reluctantly as I held the lesson plans. The hallways twisted and turned as if they'd been designed by someone who'd never heard of straight lines. Doors appeared where there shouldn't have been doors. Staircases spiraled up into nothingness. Once I swore I saw a window looking out over an endless void filled with shimmering stars, and then it blinked and I realized it was not a window at all. I started to wonder if I was dreaming. I definitely had to be dreaming. Eventually, we stopped in front of a door that looked no different from any other. A simple wooden thing with a tarnished brass handle. But when Mortimer opened it, I immediately wished he hadn't. The first thing that hit me was the smell of formaldehyde mixed with something sweet, like rotting fruit. The second thing was the jars. Dozens, no hundreds of jars lined every available surface in the room. They ranged from tiny vials no bigger than my thumb to massive glass containers, big enough to hold a whole watermelon, and inside each one floated eyeballs. Some were human, or at least they looked human, but there were others that were decidedly not. Slit-pupiled reptilian eyes, glowing orbs that seemed to follow my every move. Even one jar containing what looked disturbingly like an oversized spider's cluster of 8 eyes. Mortimer said cheerfully, "Iris is at first." I didn't see Iris amidst all the clutter, but then she emerged from behind a tall shelf stacked with jars labeled with things like specimen number 47. Cyclopean variant and property of Iris do not touch. She was beautiful, intelligent, but she looked completely insane. Her hair was pulled back into a braid, so tight it looked painful. She wore thick glasses and a lab coat that was way too big for her. The sleeves rolled up several times to reveal ink-stained fingers. Around her neck hung a magnifying glass on a chain, and her shoe squeaked faintly as she approached. There was something about the way she moved, like she was gliding more than walking, and her eyes had this sharpness, like they could cut straight through you. She didn't say hello or anything, just walked right up to me, her lips twitching slightly. I tried to step back instinctively, but my heel hit the edge of the desk behind me. Iris stopped when she was just close enough that I could smell the faint chemical tang of formaldehyde clinging to her. Her hand came up suddenly and lightly touched my face. Her fingers were cold. I blinked, frozen in place, more out of confusion than fear. She tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was some kind of specimen in one of her jars. And then she said it, not loudly, not dramatically, but softly and with this weird certainty. "I want your eyes." "Well, they're in my face for now," she said without missing a beat. And then, just like that, she stepped back, turned on her heel, and started walking toward another door at the far end of the room. "That's just Iris. You'll get used to it," Mortimer said. Somehow, I doubted that Mortimer motioned for me to follow him, his long coat swishing behind him as he shuffled toward the door Iris had disappeared through. I glanced back at the jars lining the shelves, all filled with cloudy liquid and things that probably shouldn't still have been floating in there. A large jar near the window caught my eye. A pale, wrinkled hand suspended mid-clench, like it was trying to grab something just out of reach. Yeah, I was definitely not going to get used to this. Mortimer called over his shoulder, already halfway out the door. I hurried after him. The door led into a narrow corridor, dimly lit by flickering torches. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips, exposing patches of cracked plaster beneath. Mortimer stopped in front of another heavy wooden door and gave me one of those lopsided grins that looked more like he was about to do something terrible than anything reassuring. He pushed it open without knocking. The classroom beyond classroom was a bit of a stretch, actually. The place looked less like a learning environment and more like the aftermath of a very rowdy seance. The desks were mismatched and arranged haphazardly, some missing legs, and propped up with stacks of ancient books that had probably been pulled straight from the walls of overstuffed shelves lining one side of the room. Candles burned low in waxy globs along every windowsill, their light casting weird, jittery shadows across the cracked blackboard. And at the front of the room stood Fred. Oh, if you could call it standing. He was sort of hunched forward at an unnatural angle. His shoulders twisted, like he'd forgotten how to carry his own weight. His clothes were peeling off him in tattered strips, an old suit jacket over a shirt that might have been white about 50 years ago, but now looked like it had been dunked in mud and left out to dry. His head jerked when we entered, a sickening crackle echoing through the air as he turned too quickly, neck bending just a little too far to be natural. He didn't say anything. Fred didn't really seem like the type who could say anything instead. He picked up a chunk of chalk from the tray beneath the blackboard and began scribbling slowly, filling every inch of available space with what could only be described as utter nonsense. Strings of letters that didn't form words, symbols that maybe once belonged to some language nobody spoke anymore, or maybe just shapes Fred thought looked nice. One especially aggressive stroke sent half the chalk flying in my direction, bouncing off my shoe before rolling under one of the desks. I managed to get out, stepping back instinctively. Fred froze mid-scribble. His hand hovered just inches from the board, a hand that was mostly bone. Now he turned again, slower this time, and I swear I felt my stomach drop when his milky eyes landed on me. They weren't lifelike exactly. There was something swirling in there, deep down where light should not have reached. And then they lit up. Literally. Fred's eyes glowed faintly blue for just a moment before he dropped the chalk entirely and started shuffling toward me with his arms outstretched. "Oh no," I muttered under my breath, backing up until I bumped into Mortimer. He was leaning casually against one of the desks, like nothing was happening at all, watching Fred approach as if this was just another Tuesday in whatever nightmare world we were stuck in. He tilted his head toward me without looking away from Fred. "This is Fred," he said flatly. "He's dead." "You don't say," I replied. Fred groaned. "Oh," and kept coming closer. Mortimer straightened up lazily and gave a small shrug. They should probably go before I could answer or scream. Fred's bony fingers curled into claws as he lunged forward another step. Mortimer grabbed me by the arm and yanked me backward with surprising strength, dragging me toward the door. "Fred's a bit clingy," he muttered. "You'll get used to it, or not." He didn't wait for my reply, steering me out of the room and into yet another dimly lit hallway. The corridors here seemed to stretch and twist forever, an endless maze. I stumbled along beside Mortimer, still trying to process what had just happened back there with Fred. My head was spinning, but Mortimer didn't seem to care. He moved quickly, boots scuffing against the worn stone floor as he led me deeper into this bizarre, sprawling place. "All right," he said finally, stopping so abruptly that I almost crashed into his back. He turned around and gave me a crooked grin that wasn't exactly reassuring. "Time to meet another one of your teachers." I blinked at him. "Another one? Is this going to be like a thing? A parade of nightmare creatures?" "No." "Val, maybe." He raised an eyebrow and pointed down the corridor towards a heavy wooden door that looked like it had seen better centuries. It was covered in deep claw marks, actual gouges that made the wood splinter in jagged patterns, and there were strange muddy footprints leading out from underneath it. "Okay. What exactly is behind door number 2? I asked. As if in answer, the door creaked open on its own with an ominous groan, revealing a figure standing just inside the room beyond. At first glance, I thought it was some kind of wild animal, a huge wolf-like creature hunched over slightly, as though it had just barely managed to squeeze itself into the too small space. Its fur was thick and dark, nearly black, except for faint streaks of silver that caught the light when it shifted. Then it turned its head toward us, and I realized this wasn't just a wolf. Its face. His face was half human, half beast, with sharp yellow eyes that glowed faintly in the gloom. His mouth curved into what could only be described as a friendly smile if you ignore the rows of very sharp teeth, and he raised one massive paw hand in greeting. "Well, hey there," he said cheerfully, his voice warm and surprisingly normal despite his appearance. "You must be the new kid." I stared at him, utterly speechless. Mortimer clapped me on the shoulder again, more forcefully this time, and gestured toward the wolf man, as if this whole situation was totally normal. "This is Mr." Lyle, he said casually. "The touch is there, you'll find out. Mr." Lyle stepped forward into the hallway, towering over both of us, but radiating an odd sense of calm friendliness. Despite his intimidating size and monstrous features up close, I noticed that his fur was neatly groomed, Not exactly salon quality, but definitely cleaner than I'd expected. And there was something almost endearing about the way his ears twitched slightly when he spoke. Well, it's nice to meet you. Let's have lunch later in the cafe on me. All right, before I could respond, the floor beneath us gave a sudden, ominous tremor, like the whole building had woken up in a bad mood. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, then steadied. A low rumble reverberated through the hallway, rattling the glass trophy cases and making the lockers shudder against their hinges. It wasn't violent enough to send us stumbling, but it was frightening. Mortimer's cheerful expression had dropped in an instant. His eyes darkened, his face becoming unreadable as he tilted his head slightly, like he was trying to hear something just beyond the edge of comprehension. "It's trying to get out," he said. "Excuse me, I have business with that." He spun on his heel and marched off down the hallway without another word, a long coat swishing behind him like some kind of dramatic action hero from a movie. His heavy boots echoed against the floor even as the rumbling began to subside. I started to say something, anything but Mr. Lyle cut me off with a lazy wave of one clawed hand. Don't worry about him," he said easily, as if we all hadn't just experienced what felt like a mini earthquake. "That guy's always got some kind of business. Come on, kid, let's get you situated." Before I could object or ask literally any of the 100 questions clawing their way into my brain, Mr. Lyle jerked his thumb toward a nearby stairwell and started walking with long strides that almost felt more animal than human. I hesitated for half a beat before following him. Honestly, I didn't know what else to do. The stairway smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant as we descended into what seemed like the bowels of the school. With every step downwards, it felt less like an ordinary school and more like, well, something else entirely. The walls became rougher somehow. Not quite stone, but definitely not drywall either. And there was this faint hum in the air that made my teeth ache if I thought about it too hard. At last, Mr. Lyle pushed his way through a heavy wooden door at the end of a dimly lit corridor marked with a large red 6. It creaked loudly on its ancient hinges as he gestured for me to step inside. The classroom had rows of desks, all lined up nice and tidy. Up at the front, the teacher's desk took center stage, shining under a mysterious soft golden light. "Well, here we are, Mr. Lyle said casually as he leaned against the door for him, arms crossed over his chest like this was all perfectly normal. I stood there awkwardly in the middle of the room. He grinned a flash of sharp teeth. That should have been terrifying, but somehow wasn't, and wrapped one claw lightly against his temple. "Well, your desk awaits. Oh, and by the way, rule number 1, always protect the children," he said, this time looking very serious. Then he smiled like before, said good luck, and walked down into the hallway, the door closing behind him. The click of the door shutting echoed louder than it had any right to in that dead silent room. I stood there for a second, just me and the rows of pristine desks, and felt like I'd been dropped into one of those weird dreams where nothing makes sense, but everything feels way too real. I took a deep breath, because what else do you do? And started walking toward the front of the room. My sneakers squeaked on the wood floor. The golden glow, coming from the teacher's desk up there, looked softer up close. Not exactly warm, but kind of mesmerizing. Like candlelight, but there weren't any candles. When I reached the desk, mine apparently, I let my bag slip off my shoulder. It hit the floor with a thud that felt way too final, like slamming a door shut behind you when you don't know if you can open it again. I stared at the desk for a second longer than necessary, half expecting to see my name carved into it or written in neat letters on a little placard or something. But no, just smooth wood and that faint, lemony polish smell clinging to it. I glanced around once more to confirm I was still alone, then let my eyes wander upward to the chalkboard behind the teacher's desk. And that's when things got even weirder. The board wasn't blank like I thought it would be. It had symbols drawn all over it in sharp white chalk strokes. They weren't numbers or letters or anything close to normal. They were these twisting, curling shapes that looked almost alive if you looked too long. Some of them spiraled inward like black holes trying to suck you in, while others stretched out spindly limbs like spiders mid-crawl. One of them looked kind of like an eye, just one big staring eye, and I swear it blinked at me. The symbols tugged at something deep in my brain, something ancient and strange, like they were trying to unlock memories I didn't even know I had. And that's when I saw him. Every single desk was full now. Kids sat stiff as mannequins in perfect rows, their faces pale and smooth, like porcelain dolls under flickering lights that definitely hadn't been on before. They weren't moving, not even breathing, as far as I could tell. Just sitting there with all their empty eyes locked onto mine, like they'd been waiting for me this whole time. Nobody said a word. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Not even that weird classroom hum of whispers or shifting chairs. Just silence. Where the hell did you all come from? A little boy's hand shot up immediately. Yeah, go ahead, ghost kid. Fred says that swearing is from the devil, he said. Sorry, I replied, still trying to figure out where the hell these kids came from. I looked around at their faces and every single hand shot up at once. I pointed to the little girl that was closest. Don't be silly, mister. Mercer, we never leave this place. We've been waiting for you. Waiting for me, I thought. What in the name of all things weird was that supposed to mean? I glanced around the room again, trying to make sense of it all. The kids, or whatever they were, still hadn't moved from their perfect postures. A breeze I couldn't place stirred through the room, tugging at my sleeves, though the windows were sealed shut. It was unsettling, sure, but there was something else, something curious about them. Okay, I said, forcing a casual tone like I wasn't on the verge of bolting out the door. Well, since you've been waiting so patiently, guess we should get to know each other. Why don't we go around and introduce ourselves? The little girl who'd spoken first raised her hand without hesitation. Her wide eyes sparkled unnaturally under the strange light. I'm Clara, she said with a smile. That seemed just a few teeth too big for her mouth. I look forward to consuming her. She paused, as if catching herself mid-sentence. Your curriculum. Right, I replied. Clara might have looked human at first glance. Freckled cheeks, neat braids, but her skin had this strange sheen, almost like polished stone under candlelight in her hands. They rested perfectly still on her desk, but they looked too long with thin fingers that flexed slightly when she noticed me staring. Then there was Nova, or at least that's what she told me her name was after slowly peeling off her hood to reveal what could only be described as a sentient storm cloud where her head should have been. Instead of features, there were flashes of lightning illuminating dark, swirling mist every time she spoke in the soft, crackling whisper that somehow echoed everywhere. I love art class, she somehow said, even though she didn't seem to have a face. Those two were just the tip of the iceberg. The rest of these so-called students were equally bizarre in ways that defied logic or biology or any other comforting rulebook I could cling to. One kid appeared to be made entirely out of glass, delicate and translucent, with liquid swirling inside him like an aquarium on legs. Another had feathers sprouting along their arms and legs, which they fluffed irritably whenever anyone got too close. There was a girl who seemed perfectly normal at first glance, except for the fact that her shadow moved completely independently of her body, tapping its foot when she got bored or dramatically rolling its head back in exaggerated yawns when I started talking. And let's not forget the kid who looked like he was permanently drenched, puddles forming under his chair, honestly. This class looked less like a group of students and more like the aftermath of a science experiment gone terribly wrong, or maybe terribly right, depending on your definition of success. All their eyes, or whatever approximations they had for eyes, were fixed on me. Now, I shuffle my papers nervously. How exactly does one teach a room full of walking impossibilities? Anything. Remotely useful, right? I said, clapping my hands together in a way that I hoped conveyed confidence, but probably just made me look desperate. Okay, let's talk about something practical today, all right? Something you're all going to need to know out there in the real world. The shadow girl yawned. Her shadow gave me a thumbs down, I think. I charged ahead anyway, because what else could I do? All right, today let's talk about gambling. That caught their attention. Or at least it stopped the glass kid from swirling this internal liquid around like an edgy lava lamp. All right, so gambling. I began pacing in front of the desks like some kind of wannabe professor. It's all fun and games until it isn't. Trust me on this one. You know, I had this buddy once, Jax. Yeah, Jax. Smart guy. Handsome guy. Could count cards faster than anyone I'd ever met. We're talking borderline genius here. Nova crackled softly in what might have been laughter or static interference. Anyway, now Jax thought he had it all figured out, I said, leaning casually on a desk that groaned ominously. He walked into some dingy casino with that cocky grin of his. You know, the type, and start raking it in at that blackjack table. First few hours, you ask. Boom. Winning left and right. Drinks on him. Everyone loves him and life's good. The feathered kid leaned forward slightly. Maybe they're starting to get into it. But then I said dramatically, lowering my voice like we were swapping secrets around a campfire. He gets greedy, starts thinking Lady Luck owes him something extra just cause he flashed her a wink earlier. You know what I'm talking about, feathered kid. Next thing you know, he's doubling down on every hand like he thinks he's hot shit. There was an audible gasp from the students then. Oh yeah, sorry. I forgot no swearing. It's from the devil. Then what happened? Ask Glass Boy. What happened? I repeated, what always happens? The house cleans him out faster than you can say bad life choices. Guy walked out of there with nothing but lint in his pockets and a lifetime full of regret. The puddle kid sloshed audibly in his seat, leaning forward like he couldn't wait for the next twist in the story. Meanwhile, feathered kid had that skeptical eyebrow lift going on, like he was trying to decide if he liked the story. Now I continued, letting the tension build for a beat longer than necessary. Because, hey, storytelling is an art form. You think that'd be enough for our guy to wake up and smell the burnt toast that was his decision-making skills? But no. See, this genius decides he's gonna win it all back. How? Asked Puddle Kid. His voice gurgled with honest-to-goodness curiosity. Bless him. How you say? By borrowing money from literally anyone dumb enough to hand it over, I said, shaking my head like I still couldn't believe it. Friends. Strangers. His cousin who thinks carrot card readings are a legitimate retirement plan. You name it. And you know what happens when you borrow money in a casino, right? Feathered kid visibly perked up. The house breaks your legs. What? No. The kind of casinos you've been hanging out at. No leg breaking. Just good old-fashioned humiliation. Our guy gets kicked out before he can even play another hand because security caught wind of his little loan operation. Can you believe that? The Glass Boy tilted his head. So, he lost everything and got banned. Exactly, I said. And then he had to make the long walk of shame through the parking lot with nothing but his knocked-over ego and an empty wallet rattling around in his jacket. Puddle Kid made some kind of sympathetic squelch noise. Might have been applause, hard to tell. And Feather Kid leaned back like he'd heard enough to pass judgment. So what happened to him after that? He asked. Oh, he pulled himself together eventually. Got a job driving a hot dog truck. Taco truck. He drives a lot of trucks, but every time he hears the jingle-jangle of poker chips, he gets this haunted look in his eyes and he starts muttering stuff about odds and probability. Real tragic stuff, kids. The room went quiet for half a second as they all processed the tale. Well, if there's one thing you kids should take away from all this, it's to never mix vodka with sadness. The entire classroom stared up at me in total confusion. And that's it for me today. You kids have a good night. I'm going home and I'm never coming back. But Mr. Mercer, it's only lunchtime, one of the students said. So it is. And then the ground began to vibrate beneath us. A low, ominous rumble. And it wasn't an earthquake. The rumbling grew louder, deeper, shaking dust loose from the ceiling tiles overhead. A faint crackling sound reached my ears. Something splintering under immense pressure. And before I could locate its source, it just happened right there in front of me, in front of all of us. The floor just split open. It didn't happen with a subtle creak or slow crawl. No, this was violent and abrupt. 1 second there was solid linoleum beneath our feet, and the next, there was a jagged, gaping fissure right down the center of the classroom. The desks nearest to it tipped forward precariously before clattering loudly into the void below. I stumbled back against the wall, watching in disbelief as something massive and pale emerged from that dark chasm, something that looked distinctly like a hand. No, not just a hand, a giant hand. Its flesh was oddly smooth and human-like, despite its enormous size, veins running faintly beneath its skin, knuckles bending with an audible creak as it flexed its fingers. For one surreal moment, none of us moved, and then chaos erupted. The hand moved fast and grabbed hold of the nearest group of kids. They barely had time to react before they were lifted into the air like dolls and yanked into the abyss below. Their screams echoed briefly before being swallowed by whatever lay beneath us. I ran towards them, or at least I think I tried to, but my legs felt disconnected from reality. Another swipe from the monstrous hand claimed a second cluster of students, pulling them down into the darkness without hesitation or mercy. All I could do was stand there as desk after desk tumbled downward into nothingness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The hand retreated back into the chasm. The floor snapped shut, and it was over. I stood there, staring at the floor below me with my mouth wide open. This day had to be a dream. I left my bag where it was, and I ran. I ran down the hallway, quickly bumping into Mortimer. Then, the kids are gone, I said. Is that so? He replied calmly. Yes, it is so. The floor opened up and something grabbed him. You should probably do something about this. Mortimer became much more serious then. Did Mr. Lyle explains the first rule? What? I mean, always protect the children, he interrupted. Now, I do not know what you saw, Jack, but this type of thing happens often. It is up to you to serve them if you want to keep your position here. What the hell are you talking about? How am I supposed to save him? I have no idea what's going on here. Up until this point, I actually thought I was dreaming. This is no dream, Jack. Those kids are your responsibility. And seeing how they were taken around lunchtime, whatever took them is probably very, very hungry, he said, beginning to walk away. As he walked down the hallway, he said one last thing over his shoulder. Rule number 2. If your children are taken by an entity on your first day, you may enlist the help of one other teacher to retrieve them. Would you like assistance? I am unfortunately busy, but you may choose between the help of Mr. Lyle, Iris, or Fred. I stared up at him. Well, if those are my choices, I'm obviously not going with Fred. Mortimer interrupted before I could finish, looking over at Fred, who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. His arms stretched out in my direction as he let out a slow moan. Perfect timing as usual, Fred. Assist on Nudica in retrieving his children. Fred looked over at me with what I can only describe as a zombie smile, drooled a bit and shambled over my way. I stepped back, and before I could protest, Mortimer put his hand on my shoulder and said this was fat. Fred will surely help, but don't let him bite you. And then, before I knew what happened, Mortimer was gone, and it was just me and Fred. Hi, Fred. Fred groaned in return, a sound that echoed down the dimly lit hallway like an old door creaking open. He smelled faintly of mildew and regret, and I could swear the air around him was colder than the rest of the place. His outstretched hands wobbled in my direction, right? Yeah, well, this is going to be great. Fred's jaw hung open slightly, as though perpetually on the verge of saying something profound, but never quite getting there. Instead, he moaned again, a low, guttural sound that made me check my exposed neck. He started shuffling down the hallway with a gait that could be best described as, well, like a zombie. I followed reluctantly, muttering under my breath about how Mortimer had clearly lost his mind, leaving me with this guy. Fred didn't seem to care or notice because he was too busy shambling toward an ominous black door at the very end of the hall. It stood out starkly against the faded wallpaper, its surface carved with intricate symbols that writhed in the dim light like they were alive. Above it was a plaque that read the basement. Leads to demons, entities, other worlds, and worse. Enter at your own peril. Fred reached for the doorknob with an unsettling amount of enthusiasm for someone who was dead. His fingers curled around it, and for one horrible moment, I thought his hand might just fall off. But no, it stayed attached long enough for him to twist the knob and push the door open with a groan of old hinges. Behind the door was a narrow spiral staircase descending into what appeared to be infinite darkness. The kind of darkness that feels alive, like it's watching you back. Fred gestured vaguely toward the stairs, then looked back at me. "You know, this feels like a bad idea," I said to him. Though Fred responded by letting out another moan that sounded suspiciously affirmative. With no real choice, thanks again, Mortimer, I followed Fred onto the staircase and down into what seemed like another world. The steps were slick and uneven, each one steep enough to make me question whether OSHA existed in this universe. Fred moved with surprising ease, despite looking like he should have fallen apart several flights ago. We spiraled downward endlessly, or so it felt. The only sounds were our footsteps, mine careful and deliberate, his dragging and crazy, and every so often I'd hear something skittering just beyond where the faint light could reach. About halfway down, the walls started to change. At first I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but no, definitely not. The rough stone bricks that had barely held themselves together up till now began to shift into something smoother, shinier, almost polished. The faint glow from above dimmed further, until it was just made fried and the eerie shimmer of the walls. And then there were carvings. Just little ones at first. Lines and dots etched haphazardly into the walls. But as we went deeper, the carvings grew more detailed. Faces twisted in anguish stared out from the slick surface, their mouths open as if mid-scream. Eyes too large for their faces seemed to follow me as I descended. Some of them were grotesque, others disturbingly beautiful, but all of them shared one thing in common. They looked alive, like if I lingered too long or stared too hard, they'd blink. Or worse. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on Fred's lurching back and tried not to think about how creepy he looked. His head tilted slightly to one side every few steps, like he was listening for something once or twice. I caught him glancing over his shoulder at me, but not at my face. No, Fred was looking at something behind me. I didn't dare turn around. Somewhere far below us there's a sound, a low rumble. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't machinery either. It felt alive, like some massive creature shifting in its sleep. "Fred, what's that?" I said, but he didn't so much as grunt an acknowledgement. His pace actually picked up as we descended further. The speed increase I didn't really appreciate. The air grew colder the deeper we went. My breath fogged in front of me. Though Fred seemed unaffected because of course he was. Why would an undead guide care about things like body temperature? "Fred, where are we going?" I asked. Fred didn't answer obviously, but this time when he turned his head toward me, well, it wasn't his usual lifeless stare that greeted me. His grimace seemed bigger somehow, wider. I stopped walking for half a second, and then Fred stopped too. He turned fully now, standing crooked on a step a few feet below, like some kind of gargoyle. His head tilted sharply, the vertebrae in his neck letting out a sickening crack. "Fred, do you know where we're going?" He didn't answer. Shocker. Instead, he turned on his heel and resumed his descent down the steps. When we reached the bottom, there they were, 6 doors lined up in a neat little row. Like contestants on some nightmarish game show, where prizes probably included immediate death or eternal torment. They were identical, except for one thing. Their colors, red, blue, green, orange, black, and white, and their weathered surfaces suggested they'd been standing guard here for centuries. The air smelled damp and metallic. And somewhere far off in the darkness, water dripped with a maddening rhythm. Fred shuffled back and forth in front of the doors like a wind-up toy stuck on repeat. His movements grew more frantic with each pass, and I could hear low growls escaping from what was left of his throat, a sound like gravel being ground underfoot, and it really wasn't helping my nerves. "Any chance you know which one we're supposed to pick?" I asked. Fred stopped mid-pace, turning to glare at me. He pointed a bony finger toward the doors with all the authority of someone who absolutely did not have a clue what he was doing. Great, super helpful. I watched him pace back and forth as I pulled out a box of Tic Tacs from my pocket and shook one out into my palm. And then a sudden rush of wings startled me, so badly I nearly swallowed the candy whole. A crow descended from above. It landed on a human skull, sitting atop an old wooden pedestal near the doors. Its glossy black feathers glinted faintly, even in the dim light, and its eyes locked onto mine. The bird let out 3 sharp claws that echoed off the stone walls. Well, that's not ominous at all. Fred had stopped pacing. Now he was standing completely still and staring at the crow like this was the craziest thing he'd seen all week. And don't get me wrong, on any other day, a crow appearing out of nowhere and landing on a human skull would be the strangest thing that happened to me. But not today. The bird cawed loudly again, almost impatiently, as if it wanted something. So I gave it the only thing I had. I pulled out the green Tic Tacs and tossed one over to it. The Tic Tac clattered before coming to a rest near the skull. The crow tilted its head sharply, first one way, then the other, studying the tiny candy like it was some ancient artifact whose purpose only it could divine. And then, with a quick, purposeful hop and a flick of its wings for balance, it plucked the Tic Tac up in its sharp beak for a moment. I thought that was it, that the crow would just take its strange little prize and leave. But no, it held on to the Tic Tac for a second longer than seemed necessary, almost contemplatively. And then, with an odd little twist of its head, it stood upright on the skull, as though puffing itself up for some monumental task. Its feathers ruffled slightly before settling back into place, and without so much as a glance in my direction, it gave 2 soft caws, quieter this time, and launched itself into the air. It flapped steadily upward in a way that felt almost casual, but no less deliberate. Its wings sent little puffs of dust spiraling off nearby surfaces. I watched as the bird circled lazily above us once before angling itself toward one specific darkened corner of the room. There were 3 doors there, massive things made of aged wooden bound and tarnished iron straps, each with an ornate number carved deep into their surface 123. The crow landed on the handle of door number 3, gripping tightly with its talons and shifting about awkwardly to keep its balance. The Tic Tac was still held firmly in its beak as it turned to face me again, and then it clawed just once. This time the crow dropped from its perch in one smooth motion and took off again, not flying back toward me or anywhere random, but heading straight for some unseen destination. The door, the third one, was now silent, looming taller somehow. Its weathered surface looked older than anything else around us, as if time had lingered there longer. Fred finally stirred beside me, but said nothing. I gave him a quick glance, trying to gauge whether he was about to run or worse. Let me walk through this door alone. His knuckles were white around a flashlight he still clutched, and I could practically hear him grinding his teeth. But neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved. Well, let's go find the kids, my son, my hand reaching for the tarnished doorknob, before my brain could talk me out of it. It was cold, so cold it almost felt wet, and for one second I thought it might be stuck. With a low groan that sounded vaguely like displeasure, the door gave way and swung inward. What lay beyond froze us. The first thing that hit me was the smell, like rotted fruit. Then came the room itself. It was massive. The ceiling arched impossibly high, disappearing into flickering shadows, where an ornate chandelier dangled precariously over an equally ornate dining table. This thing looked like it belonged in some kind of twisted fairy tale. It was long enough to fit an army of guests, and draped with a blood-red tablecloth embroidered with gold that shimmered every time the light caught it. But it wasn't the table itself that made my stomach drop. It wasn't even the absurd number of chairs lining each side. It was what was on the table. Or rather, who? All the children from my classroom, each one tied to a different, enormous silver plate. Like the main course of a meal, their small bodies tied up with ropes so tight they couldn't even wiggle. Their eyes darted wildly beneath blindfolds, every single one gagged, but clearly trying to scream. "Fred," I said, looking over at him, and he was looking at the children on dinner plates and licking his lips. "Fred, you can't eat them," I said, smacking him on the shoulder. "We're here to save him, dude, remember?" He groaned in protest, but then seemed to nod in agreement, I think. I hoped he wasn't going to try to eat the children, because that would definitely complicate things. That's when the noise started. A faint clicking. Soft at first, like fingernails tapping gently against glass. Just faint enough to make you wonder if you'd imagined it. But then it grew louder. A wet, chittering sound now, like bones scraping against stone, but slick with something viscous. My stomach churned. It wasn't a rhythm so much as an erratic pulse coming closer. "Fred," I whispered. My eyes darted to him. He stood frozen in place now, his head cocked to one side, like a dog listening for a whistle too high for human ears. The noise escalated sharply, a terrible skittering crash that seemed to shake the very walls. Whatever was making it was big, heavy, and moving fast. From the far corner of the room, where the darkness was complete, I thought I saw movement. Something massive shifting within the shadows, just out of reach of the dim light. And then I saw it, the largest hand I'd ever seen in my life. Not attached to any arm or body, just itself, lurched forward into view through an archway at the far end of the room. Its sheer size was enough to make my brain falter. Each finger was thicker around than a tree trunk, curling inward and outward in grotesque slow motion, like some massive predator flexing its claws. In its center, a gaping mouth split open right where its palm should have been, jagged rows of needle-sharp teeth glistening wetly under what little light reached them. It opened once, twice, snapping shut with audible clicks. "Okay, Fred," I began, giving him an encouraging pat on the back. "I'll untie the kids. You can fight that thing, okay?" Fred didn't reply. Not that I expected him to. He just gave me this look. His face set like stone, every ounce of fear or hesitation burned away and replaced with something colder, sharper. As if staring down that horrific hand thing had flipped some kind of switch inside him, Fred started shambling slowly at first, then faster, and then he launched himself at it. Fred soared through the air like some kind of zombie cannonball. For a brief, dazzling moment, I thought maybe, just maybe he had this under control. That confidence on his face wasn't for nothing, right? He'd done something like this before. Fred was built to win. Fred knew what he was doing, and then he landed directly in the thing's mouth. Shoot. Shoot, I muttered, looking back over at Fred. Now let me tell you something. There are few sights in life that will ever be as horrifying or absurd as watching your friend. Yeah, I think we're friends now. Jump into the gaping mouth of a hand creature with teeth. The thing reared back slightly like it hadn't expected this massive snack to just deliver itself. Its mouth closed around Fred with a sickening effect. Crunch. Well, that's not good. My hands went to work on the nearest ropes as fast as they could, while my brain split itself between panic and irrational hope that Fred would somehow be fine. The first kid, a little girl with big tear-streaked eyes, stumbled free once I got her ties undone. She clung to me for half a second before I gently nudged her toward the cavern's edge. I said to her in my best, "Please don't argue with me." She hesitated only for a blink before scrambling off, her tiny feet barely making a sound over the rocky floor. One by one, I quickly untied the monster children and pointed them towards the exit. Meanwhile, behind me came this wet gnashing noise, the kind of hear when someone chews a whole pack of gum at once, but way louder. And way worse, because it wasn't gum. It was Fred. The thing's jaw flexed again and again, trying really hard to turn him into an afternoon snack. But well, it didn't seem to be working. Fred was still intact somehow. The creature made this guttural huffing noise. Frustration. Annoyance. I don't know. And it shook its head violently, like a dog trying to dislodge peanut butter. I didn't have time to watch, though. The kids. There were too many of them, bound and whimpering in shadows, their small hands tugging uselessly at the thick ropes that held them. I moved fast. My fingers were clumsy and slick with sweat, but I worked through each knot like my life and theirs depended on it. Which, it did. The next kid squirmed free as I yanked on the last loop of rope. He bolted before I could even tell him to go, his tiny frame darting towards the cavern's edge like a startled rabbit. Good. That's what I needed them to do. Run, no questions asked. The third knot was tighter than the others, and my hands started cramping from the effort. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, gritting my teeth behind me. Fred made this awful groaning sound. The gnashing noise stopped for a second, replaced by a deep guttural growl. Almost there, I whispered to myself. Or maybe the kid who I was helping. The knot finally gave way with a sharp snap, and I grabbed the kid's arm gently but firm. "Go," I urged, shoving him towards safety. Then I turned to the next one, and then the next, and the next. My knees scraped raw against the jagged floor as I crawled between all of them, untying ropes that seemed endless and impossibly knotted. The air in the cavern felt heavier every second, hot and humid, but I couldn't stop. A set of bright eyes blinked at me from behind a gag made out of someone's torn shirt. I yanked it down first before attacking the ropes around their wrists. Behind me came another wet crunch, a noise so awful that bile rose in my throat. But still, Fred kept groaning, low and steady. Finally, I got to the last kid, a little boy who couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. His lips quivered as he stared up at me, but he didn't make a sound. Not even when I accidentally nicked his skin with my thumbnail while tearing through his bonds. "It's all right," I told him softly. "You're going to be fine." As soon as his hands were free, he took off, sprinting for the exit like all the others, disappearing into the dark mouth of freedom beyond this nightmarish cave. All right, that was all of them. All the kids are safe and gone. And when I turned back towards Fred, well, he was still there, still alive. In fact, he looked perfectly fine. Fred lifted his arm and pointed slowly to the exit. He moaned something that sounded like go. At least I think it was that I wasn't going to argue. I had to get the kids back to the school, and Fred did look okay. I backed up a step, then another. Fred was currently stuck, but at this point he seemed indestructible. What mattered was getting out of here, getting these kids out of here. The whole way back to the stairwell felt longer than it should have been. I kept turning back over my shoulder, and when I reached the bottom of the stairs, I found all of them. All the kids were there. "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though my hands were shaking bad. "We're going up now. Everybody sticks together, okay? Don't stop until we're all outside." None of them spoke. They just nodded silently. We started climbing, the steps far steeper than I remember them being on the way down. The kids' small feet scuffled against the stone as we ascended, their little hands gripping the rusty railing. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting Fred or whatever was left of them to come lunging up the stairs behind us, but all I could hear was the faint scrape of our shoes. When we finally reached the top of the stairs, I nearly collapsed against the wall from relief. The old door leading out into the main hallway stood there like a promise. It groaned when I shoved it open, but it gave way, spilling us into the school beyond. "Oh, keep moving," I urged, waving them through. They filed past me quickly, silent little ghosts, wide-eyed and pale, but none of them needed much encouragement to get as far away from that basement as possible. The last kid hesitated for just a second, their tiny hand brushing against mine before they darted through the doorway with a speed that surprised me, without thinking too hard about it. I slammed the door shut behind us with both hands and leaned against it like that alone could keep everything down there from crawling up after us. I let out a shaky breath. Okay, we're good. The kids had settled not far down the hallway, some slumping against the peeling wallpaper, while others sat cross-legged on the floor. I slid down to sit on the floor opposite them, letting my head fall back against the wall for just a moment as my heart tried to beat its way out of my chest. And then he showed up. Mortimer's polished black shoes clicked sharply against the floor long before he came into view. When he rounded the corner, his face looked exactly how I remembered. He looked pleased. "Well done, mister." "Mercer," he said cheerfully enough. "All the children seem to be accounted for." "Yeah, but Fred's still down there." "He's trying to kill him," I said. "Fred's already dead, and most of the time you can't kill what's already dead." He winked. "Chop, chop, children." Lunchtime. They stood up like it was just another day, walking past us and toward the cafeteria doors. To be honest, I wasn't feeling much livelier myself, but Mortimer didn't give us much of a choice. He clapped me on the shoulder with one of his gloved hands, too hard as usual, and steered me down the hallway like I was a shopping cart. When we got to the cafeteria, it was chaotic. Not normal school cafeteria chaos, but this was something else entirely. The place thrummed with activity that just felt a little off. Kids were eating food that glowed faintly under the fluorescent lights. A couple of students at the nearest table were having what looked like an intense argument over whether or not the spaghetti could actually try to strangle you. And then there was Iris, sitting primly at a table in the corner, like nothing weird was happening at all, sipping what I really hoped was tomato soup and not blood. Mortimer strode up to the line like he owned the place. Maybe he did. Me? I hung back for a second, sticking close to Mister. Wow. The two of us shuffled forward cautiously until we were standing behind Mortimer at the counter. That's when I saw it, the creature scooping food onto trays, with a mashup of parts that should not have been assembled together under any circumstances. Their faces were stitched together from patches of varying skin tones, and one I had an unsettling habit of rolling around independently of the other. They were massive too, towering over even Mortimer by a good 2 feet, with arms thick enough to bench press a small car. Mortimer didn't bat an eye. "I want a hot dog without the bun," he said crisply, enunciating each word like he was placing an order at a five-star restaurant. The lunch creature pulled out what looked like a sausage but smelled like death. In any case, they slapped it onto Mortimer's tray and slid it across with a grunt. I wasn't eager to see what my options were, but eventually it was my turn. I ended up with something resembling mashed potatoes. If mashed potatoes had veins and what might have been green beans in another dimension, Mortimer waited politely while I got my food and then led me back through the maze of tables towards what I could only assume was the teacher section. Mr. Lyle followed us closely, carrying his own tray piled high with unidentifiable slop that he seemed way too comfortable with. And then there was Fred. Wait, Fred, sitting at the table like nothing had happened and chewing on what looked like part of a giant finger. "Hey, Fred." Fred didn't even look up at first, just kept gnawing on that grotesque piece of finger like it was a chicken drumstick. When he finally did lift his head, it was a slow, deliberate motion. His jaw was still working over whatever nightmare meat he'd been tearing into. His eyes met mine for half a second before he let out this long, drawn-out groan that sounded more annoyed than anything else. Then he just went right back to chewing, like we were inconveniencing him. I stood there for a moment, completely stunned. My tray wobbled in my hands. The mashed potatoes jiggled ominously. Then Mortimer clapped me on the back, hard enough to make me stagger forward and nearly drop the tray. "Well done," Mortimer said. "Good thinking on the tic-tacs. How did you know?" The rest of the table erupted into murmurs of approval and pats on my shoulders and back. One of them, a guy who looked like he'd been cobbled together from spare parts in a bad sci-fi movie, gave me what I think was a thumbs up. I just knew," I said. At this point, I figured it was better to just roll with whatever bizarre narrative they conjured up, rather than admit I had no idea what I was doing. Fred let out another low groan. I'm still not bothering to participate in any actual conversation and bit into the finger again with a crunch. I decided right then and there that I was not hungry anymore. "Well, Mr. Mercer, we do hope you stay," Mortimer said as he grinned over at me in a serial killer kind of way. Still, I smiled back soon after. I found myself back in the classroom, finishing up the day. I spent the better part 2 hours having the students explain to me what that creature had been, how often this kind of thing happened, and what exactly the school was. That sort of thing. I didn't get all the answers I wanted, but it was a start. As the final bell rang out, I leaned back against my desk and let out a deep breath. The monster kids began packing up their things. Well, most of them. A few were still putting finishing touches on projects that involved suspiciously glowing substances or scribbling in notebooks that appeared to hum faintly when opened. Just another normal day here, apparently. I glanced at the door, ready to make my escape. Or so I thought before I could move. A small crowd of children started forming around me. It began with Nova, the sentient storm cloud girl who likes art. She handed me something, the storm cloud where her head should have been, now raining softly into her school uniform. It was a drawing of the entire class on dinner plates, with a giant hand monster towering over them between the children and the monster. Stood me and Fred, staring defiantly up in it with more courage than I remember having. Nova hugged me, then ran off. Then came Puddle Kid, Feathered Kid, Glass Kid, Shadow Girl. One by one, each child came up, gave me a gift, a hug, and ran off into the hallway. That hit me harder than I expected. My throat felt tight. I looked at these bizarre monster kids, Every single one of them, unique in ways I couldn't begin to explain. Sure, they were strange and kind of terrifying, but they were all so genuine, in a way that most people weren't anymore. For the first time since I'd walked through those creaky old doors earlier this week, I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. Maybe this wasn't just some bizarre temporary gig after all. I cleared my throat, grabbed my bag, closed the classroom door behind me, and headed to my car. As I put the key into the ignition, I glanced toward the school windows and saw what looked like Fred waving sadly at me. Then I saw the giant finger in his mouth and realized he was probably just eating, not saying goodbye. But who knows? Maybe it was a little of both. As I drove home, I thought about my first day at the Nightshade Institute. Today had been completely insane, terrifying beyond words, and I still wasn't 100% sure this hadn't all been a dream. But this was only day one, and I had to admit this had been fun. What's more, I'd somehow managed to follow rule number one. I smiled, glancing over at the children's gifts on the seat next to me. Yeah, I was definitely gonna stay. People vanish in these woods. It's not something the general public hears about, and it sure as hell isn't something we talk about openly. But it happens. It happens more often than you think. And it's not just the usual stuff. The lost hikers or the idiot campers who wander off. Those we can explain mostly. No, it's the others, the ones who disappear without a trace. Without any rhyme or reason. The ones where every possible explanation falls apart and you're left standing there wondering if you're ever going to figure out what the hell happened. Those are the ones that keep me up at night. I've been a park ranger for 20 years and I've seen things out there that I wish I had. The kind of things that make you question everything you know about the world you learn after a while. That nature doesn't follow the same rules we do. Doesn't care about logic or reason or what's supposed to happen. It just is. And sometimes it takes people. No explanation, no sign of struggle, just gone. There's one spot in particular that's always given me trouble. A clearing deep in the northern part of the park. It's not on any map, and most people don't know how to find it unless they really know the area. That's probably for the best. You wouldn't want to end up there. I've had to pull more than a few people out of that area, and not all of them have come back in one piece, if they've come back at all. I remember the first time I realized something was really wrong out there. It was about 10 years ago, maybe a little more. We got a call about a missing kid. A little girl who'd wandered off while her family was setting up camp. Now, that kind of thing happens more often than you'd think, and usually we find them within a few hours. They're scared, maybe a little scraped up, but they're fine. This one was different, though. We searched for 3 days. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers, everything. No sign of her. Not a footprint, not a piece of clothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. On the 4th day, we found her. Well, sort of. She was standing in the middle of that clearing, perfectly still, staring straight ahead like she was in some kind of trance. Her clothes were dirty, and she had scratches on her arms and legs. But other than that, she was fine. Physically, anyway. But she wouldn't talk. Not to me, not to her parents, not to anyone. She just stood there, staring off into the distance, like she couldn't hear us. When we tried to get her to move, she resisted. Not violently, just unwilling. It was like she wanted to stay there, like she needed to stay there. Eventually, we had to carry her out. I don't think I'll ever forget the way she looked as we walked away from that clearing. Her eyes kept flicking back to it, like she was leaving something behind, something important. We took her to the hospital, of course, but they couldn't find anything wrong with her. No trauma, no injuries, nothing. Her parents moved away a few months later, and that was the last I heard of her. That was the first time I knew there was something very wrong with this place, but it wouldn't be the last. There was a man about 5 years after that. An experienced hiker knew the park like the back of his hand. He'd been coming here for years, always took the same trails, always checked in with us before heading out. Good guy. Respectful, didn't take unnecessary risks. He went missing on a stretch of trail not far from where the girl had been found. We launched a full search effort, combing every inch of the area. Again, nothing. For days, it was like he just vanished. And then on the fifth day, we found his backpack leaning against a tree. No sign of his struggle, no indication that he'd been attacked. The contents were still inside. Water, snacks, his map. It was like he'd set it down just a few minutes before we found it, but there was no sign of him. Not a single footprint. No indication that he'd gone off the trail. He was just gone. I've had more cases like that over the years. People who should have been easy to find, people who knew the area, people who didn't take risks, and yet they disappear. Sometimes we find them, but more often than not, we don't. When we do, they're usually not in any state to tell us what happened. Either they can't remember, or they refuse to talk about it. There is a pattern, though. The ones we do find, they always come back different, distant, like something's been taken from them. Some of them recover, but most don't. They just kind of fade away. I've read the reports, looked over the evidence. None of it makes sense. But the strangest one of all happened just last year. A group of 4 college kids came up here for a weekend camping trip. They were all outdoorsy types, used to hiking and camping in rough terrain. They set up camp near the river, about 6 miles from the station, and everything seemed fine. They checked in with us on their way out, and we didn't hear from them again. Not until one of them came stumbling back into the station 3 days later, alone. His clothes were torn and he was covered in dirt, but that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the look on his face. He was terrified. He couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop talking. He kept saying the same thing over and over again. It took them. We tried to get him to calm down, tried to get a straight answer out of him, but he wasn't making any sense. Eventually, we managed to get enough out of him to piece together what had happened, or at least what he thought had happened. According to him, they'd been hiking through the northern part of the park, not far from the clearing I mentioned. They were off the main trail, but they knew where they were. At least they thought they did, he said. It started with a strange feeling like they were being watched. They couldn't shake it, no matter how far they walked. Then they started hearing things. Voices, but not like normal voices. More distant conversations. But there was no one around. No other hikers, no animals, nothing. He said they tried to ignore it, but the feeling kept getting worse. And then on the second night, one of his friends vanished. They woke up in the middle of the night. He was just gone. His sleeping bag was still there, his shoes, his pack, everything. But he was gone. They searched for hours, calling his name, trying to find any sign of where he'd gone. But there was nothing. Just like the others, nothing. They packed up and started hiking back towards the station, figuring they'd report it and get a search party going. But then the second one disappeared this time. The kid swore he'd seen it happen. They were walking, and suddenly his friend just wasn't there. 1 second he was right behind him, and the next he was gone. No sound, no sign of a struggle. Nothing. Just gone. By the time they realized what had happened, it was too late. The third one went next. The kid said he turned around to check on his friend, and she was just gone. He didn't even hear her leave. 1 second she was there, and the next she wasn't. He ran. He said he ran for miles. Not stopping, not looking back, just running. Eventually, he made it to the station, but all his friends were gone. We searched, of course, but we didn't find him. No sign of a struggle. No sign that they'd ever been there at all. We found their camp, though. It was exactly how the kid had described. 3 sleeping bags, 3 packs, all untouched. No sign of foul play. No sign of animals, just empty. That kid never came back to the park, and I don't blame him after what he saw. Whatever it was, I wouldn't have come back either. I've asked myself 100 times what it is that takes these people. I've come up with every possible explanation. Wild animals, freak accidents, even some kind of human element, like a serial killer or a group of crazies living off the grid. But none of that fits. Not really. Not with the way they disappear, and not with the way they come back, if they come back at all. I've looked into the history of the park, tried to find anything that might explain what's going on here. There's nothing. At least nothing concrete. There are stories, of course. There always are old legends, folk tales passed down by the native tribes that used to live in the area. They talk about spirits, about places in the woods where the boundary between worlds is thin, where people can be taken. But those are just stories, right? At least that's what I used to think. Now I'm not so sure. Anyway, I don't go near those clearings anymore. Not unless I have to. And even then, I don't linger. Something's out there, something that doesn't want to be found. But at the same time, it's always watching, always waiting for something. I thought about leaving the job, quitting, moving somewhere far away where I don't have to think about it anymore. But every time I do, I remember the people who've disappeared, the families who never got answers, the ones still waiting for their loved ones to come back. And I know I can't leave. Not yet. Not until I figure out what's really going on. So I keep searching, keep patrolling the same trails, hoping that one day I'll find something that makes sense, something that explains all the disappearances, all the strange things that happen out here. I have seen some things in these woods that defy logic, but there are stories from other rangers, stories passed down between shifts or whispered over the campfire that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Some of them, you wish they were just those stories, but a few of them they're not. These are the ones that keep you looking over your shoulder at night. One that still bothers me is about a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old at the time. It happened about 8 years ago, I think. Her family was camping at one of the park's more remote sites, an area that's not easy to reach without a good bit of experience hiking. They were seasoned campers, not the type to make dumb mistakes, and they'd set up their tent near a stream about 3 miles off the main trail. The parents said she wandered off while they were setting up for the evening. They thought she'd just gone to explore by the water or pick flowers like they often did on camping trips. When she didn't come back after a minute or so, they went looking for her. That was the start of a long, terrible search. We organized a team and spread out, sweeping the woods for any sign of her. We found footprints leading away from the camp, small ones. Had to be hers for sure, but after about half a mile, they just stopped. No signs of struggle, no signs she'd fallen. They just ended. We searched for days. It's always worse when it's a kid, and we were determined to find her. But after the first week, we had to call it off. The woods had taken her. At least that's what we thought. And then 5 years later, she just walked out of the forest. It was early in the morning, just after dawn, when one of the other rangers spotted her. She was standing at the edge of the tree line near one of the old fire towers we don't use anymore. At first, he thought it was just some lost hiker's kid, maybe wandered off from a group. But as he got closer, he realized she wasn't just lost. She was the same girl who had disappeared all those years ago. The same face, the same clothes, though they were worn and ragged. And here's the craziest part. She looked like she hadn't aged a day. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at him with this distant, hollow look. When they brought her back to the station, she still wouldn't speak. It took hours before they could get anything out of her, and even then it didn't make sense. She said she had been with him. When we pressed her on who he was, she just kept saying the same thing over and over again. The bear man. She talked about being taken by this creature, something that looked like a man but wasn't. She said it had fur like a bear, but walked on 2 legs and had these huge yellow eyes that glowed in the dark. She said it had carried her deep into the woods, to a cave she didn't recognize. She lived there alone for what she thought was only a few days. But when she finally came back, everything had changed. 5 years had passed. I never saw that cave. We tried to get her to show us where it was, but every time we got close to the spot she described, she'd panic, start crying uncontrollably, saying it wasn't safe, that he was still there, watching us. The parents took her and left the area for good, and I don't blame them. Now, I've never found any evidence of this so-called bear man, but her story has stuck with me. It wasn't the way she described him that scared me. It was the way she did. There was something about her eyes when she talked about it. Like she had seen something she couldn't even begin to understand, and it had broken something inside her. Whatever took her, I don't believe it was from our world. And then there's the family. This one gets thrown around a lot, and it's one of those stories that should sound like pure fiction. But the family involved three of them: husband, wife, and their teenage son. They still swear it's true. It was late fall, right before the first snow, and they decided to do one last camping trip before winter set in. They picked a spot not far from the northern ridge, an area where the trees thin out and you could get a clear view of the valley below. They set up camp, built a fire, and settled in for the night. According to them, it started out like any other camping trip. They cooked dinner over the fire, talked about their plans for the next day, and then something strange happened. Around midnight, as they were sitting around the dying embers, they saw movement in the trees. At first, they thought it was just a couple deer passing by, but then they saw the figures stepping into the clearing. There were three of them, too pale, tall, thin, and silent. They walked slowly, almost gliding, they said, and their eyes reflected the firelight in an unnatural way. The family said they froze, unsure of what to do. The figures stopped just at the edge of the fire and stood there watching them. The husband, trying to be the rational one, called out to him, asking if they were lost or needed help. But they didn't say anything. They just stood there, staring with these wide, dark eyes that didn't blink. And then one of them smiled. Now the wife swears that's when she realized something was very wrong. The smile wasn't right. Too wide, too sharp. Like the teeth were more animal than human. That's when the figures started to move closer. They circled the fire, still not speaking, just smiling. The family did the only thing they could think of. They grabbed whatever they could and they bolted for their car, which was parked about 100 yards away. They didn't bother packing up the tent or anything else. They just ran. They said they could hear something following them, footsteps moving faster than should have been possible. But when they reached the car and turned on the headlights, there was nothing there. They drove back to the ranger station in a full-blown panic, half expecting to see those things, whatever they were again. When they got there, they told us everything. They were very scared. I could see that their hands were shaking. These weren't the kind of people to make up stories. We went back the next morning to check out their camp, and the tent was still there, half collapsed, and the fire pit was cold. There was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no tracks, nothing. The family never came back to the park after that. They moved a few states away, and the son apparently still has nightmares about those figures to this day. Some of the other rangers think they just scared themselves. Maybe they ate something that messed with their heads, or maybe they just got spooked by an animal. But I don't think so. I've heard too many stories like theirs. There's another one I've heard a few times, but this one's harder to pin down. It doesn't involve any one person or family, but a recurring phenomenon that's been reported over the years. I've never seen it myself, but enough people have mentioned it that I can't just dismiss it outright. They call it the staircase. It's exactly what it sounds like, and maybe you've heard of it. Just a set of stairs standing out in the middle of the woods with no structure attached to them. No explanation for why they're there. Some say the stairs look old, like something out of a crumbling mansion, while others say they're newer, almost pristine, like they were just built. But the stories all agree on one thing. You shouldn't climb them. The reports are always the same. Hikers stumble across the stairs, usually off the beaten path, deep in the more isolated parts of the park. Some of them get curious and climb to the top, and that's when things go bad. People who've climbed the stairs report feeling disoriented when they reach the top, like something's changed, but they can't quite put their finger on it. A few have said that when they look back down, the forest looks different, almost alien. And then when they descend, they find they're no longer in the same place they were before. The trees are wrong, the trails don't match up, and the way back seems impossibly far. The lucky ones manage to find their way back after hours or even days of wandering. The unlucky ones, well, I think you can guess they don't come back at all. There are more stories, of course. Stories of strange lights seen through the trees late at night, of voices calling from nowhere, of figures standing at the edge of campsites, watching but never approaching. Every ranger has a story, whether they'll admit it or not. Some are more willing to talk than others, but we all know there's something out there that we don't fully understand. I've thought about leaving these stories behind, walking away from the park and the strange things that happen here. But like I said, I can't. It's like the forest itself has a hold on me. Maybe I've seen too much, heard too much. Maybe it won't let me go anymore. I think about that little girl sometimes, the one who came back after all those years, and I wonder if there are others like her. People who've been taken, held somewhere in the dark corners of the forest, just waiting to come back. Maybe they're still out there, lost in some place we can't reach, watching us and waiting for the right moment to step back into our world. I don't know. And then I think about the ones who never come back. I wish I could say the stories stop there, but they don't. It's like every time I think I have heard the strangest thing these woods have to offer, something else comes along that defies explanation the most. There was this one incident, one that still confuses the hell out of me to this day. It involved a family camping near the southern edge of the park, closer to the more developed areas, but still deep enough into the wilderness to feel isolated. They had a son, maybe 10 or 11, who was in a wheelchair. He had a spinal condition, but he loved being outdoors. His parents had outfitted the chair with some all-terrain wheels so he could join them on hikes, even if they had to stick to the more flat trails. They seemed like a close-knit, very happy family, the kind that wouldn't let anything keep them from making memories together. Anyway, one night they settled in at their campsite near a small lake, roasted marshmallows, told stories by the fire, normal camping stuff. The boy went to bed early, and his parents stayed up a little later, enjoying the quiet. At some point, they both dozed off. When they woke up, the boy was gone. I can't even begin to imagine the terror they must have felt when they realized their son wasn't in his tent. They searched everywhere, called his name, but there was no sign of him. His wheelchair was still there, right where they'd left it beside the tent. It didn't make any sense. He couldn't walk on his own. How could he have just disappeared? We got the call early the next morning. Search teams were dispatched immediately. We assumed the worst, that he'd been taken. Maybe by an animal, maybe a person. But there were no tracks, no signs of struggle. The wheelchair itself hadn't been disturbed, and there were no footprints leading away from the campsite. And then 2 days later, we found him. He was discovered 47 miles away, on top of a mountain that would have been impossible for him to reach on his own. Even if he could walk, he was unharmed, sitting on a flat rock, looking out over the valley below, like he'd been waiting for someone to find him. But that's not the strangest part. Next to him, there was a large German shepherd, black and gray, with intelligent eyes. It didn't growl or act aggressively when the search team approached. It just stood there, almost like it was guarding the boy from something and waiting for us to come. When the boy's father knelt down to hug him, the dog gave off a single bark and just ran off into the woods. Nobody could catch it. It just vanished into the trees. Now the boy was dazed, but otherwise fine. He couldn't explain how he'd gotten there. All he could remember was falling asleep in his tent and waking up on the mountain with a dog next to him. He said the dog had stayed with him the whole night, keeping him warm and growling at something in the trees. Like I said, we never found the dog. No one in the area owned a German shepherd like that. We checked, and none of the local shelters had any missing. It was like the animal had appeared out of nowhere, done its job, and just disappeared again. That case haunted me for a long time. Not because of the boy. He was fine, thank God. But because of the impossibility of it all. How does a child in a wheelchair end up 47 miles away, on top of a mountain, with no explanation? And what was the dog? Was it some kind of guardian? A spirit, maybe? I don't know. But it wasn't the first time something like that had happened a few years before that. Another ranger told me about a case where a woman had been hiking with her dog, a border collie, when she disappeared. The dog came back alone weeks later, looking perfectly healthy but without any sign of its owner. We never found her. The dog couldn't explain where it had been, and neither could we. Then there's the story of the lost campers. This one gets talked about around here a lot. Though no one's ever officially confirmed it, it's one of those tales that's passed down from ranger to ranger, and each time, well, it gets a little more unsettling. The story goes that a group of campers went missing back in the 1970s. They were college kids on a weekend trip deep into the northern part of the park, far from any established campsites. They were supposed to return on Sunday, but they never showed up. A search team was sent out, and after a few days they found the campsite. Tents still pitched, food still out, but no campers. The weird part was that the campsite looked undisturbed, like they just stepped away for a moment and never came back. There were no signs of struggle, no animal tracks, nothing that would suggest they'd been attacked or wandered off, just emptiness. Sometime later, one of the campers stumbled into the ranger station, looking disoriented and confused. He couldn't remember what had happened or where the others had gone. All he could say was that they had heard something out in the woods, something calling to them, and they had followed it. But when asked what it was, he just couldn't explain. All he said was it wasn't a person. The other campers were never found. We get stories like that a lot. Hikers or campers hearing things out in the woods that they can't explain. Some say they hear voices calling their names. Others say they hear music like a far-off song on the wind. It always leads them off the trail, deeper into the woods. Sometimes they come back, and well, like I told you before, more often they don't. I used to think it was just the wind, maybe some trick of the mind. You know, people get spooked being out there in the middle of nowhere. But the more I hear these stories, the harder it is to chalk up to just imagination. There is something out there. There's a section of the park we call the Dead Zone. No one really knows how it got that name, but it has stuck. It's not an official designation, of course, but we avoid it whenever we can. Trust me, it's an area where compasses stop working and GPS signals drop out completely. You can be walking with all your gear perfectly calibrated, and the moment you step into that zone, it is like you are cut off from the rest of the world. Time moves differently there, too. You'll think you've been walking for an hour, but when you come out, it's only been minutes or vice versa. The worst part is there are stories of people going in and never coming out. One guy, a hiker with years of experience, disappeared in the dead zone about 15 years ago. We searched for him for weeks, but there was no sign of him. And then about a year later, another hiker found his clothes hanging on the branch of a tree, along with his wallet and a set of keys. The really weird thing, the clothes, keys, everything looked brand new, not dirty or worn out at all. And his family did confirm that everything was his, but we never found any other trace of him. I try not to think about that place too much, but sometimes late at night when I'm on patrol and the forest is unnervingly still, I wonder just how many people have gone missing out here. How many are still out there, wandering around, trying to find their way back and what they might have seen. Well, I could go on. There are countless stories like these, each one stranger than the next, believe me, and yet somehow they all feel connected. I've been thinking a lot lately about the people we've lost. Some we found, some we haven't. And there are days I wonder if they ever really left. And maybe they're just beyond our reach. You know, I don't know what's out there, but I feel things sometimes. Every ranger who's been here long enough does. It's not things you can see. Not really. You just kind of feel a presence. There's something out there in those woods. Something that's been here long before I got here, and something that'll be there long after I'm dead and gone. Maybe I'll never see it. Hell, maybe I don't want it. And who knows, maybe one day I'll be the one who disappears. I'll tell you this much. Whatever's out there does not care how experienced you are, how prepared you think you might be. It doesn't care if you've seen 100 strange things or none at all. When it wants you, it takes you. No questions, no explanations. I just hope that if I ever go missing out here, that there's someone like me to tell my story. My grandma was a formidable woman. She stood at a good 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a significant girth that would make a linebacker jealous. She immigrated from Ireland when she was a young girl, her family settling into the western part of Washington along the Pacific and buying up swaths of land that accumulated into a sizable property of over 110 acres. She was partially handicapped. Her right hand mangled, the pinky ring and middle fingers, worn stumps streaked with accumulated red scar tissue. It was a sore subject, and one she refused to discuss with me. Despite my rampant curiosity, I would unintentionally stare at the mass of flesh sometimes, and she would lower her gaze and make a tooting sound, scolding me. My father and she were never particularly close. He'd been sent to boarding school as a child, and I don't think he ever fully forgave her for his exile when he lost his job, and with no other options, we were forced to move in with her, a fact that we all begrudgingly accepted. Grandma's house in itself was a marvel, an old Victorian with ornate wood carvings and painted in a dark crimson. It stood in the center of a sprawling field of wildflowers and native grasses that was bordered by old-growth forest, towering trees that called it home. Had escaped the genocide of the Washington logging boom and held with them an ancient quality of some bygone era, demanding reverence. About a mile into the woods was a pristine river with clear waters that held a variety of fish, making it a prime fishing spot. I'd read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in my last year of school and fancied myself like the book's protagonist, relishing in my new environment, even asking my dad and grandma to start calling me Huck instead of my given name, Luke, a request that made my dad roll his eyes and put his head into his hands. The three of us operated like separate cogs in a machine that summer, with our own specific purposes that required little interaction with each other. Focused on applying for jobs, my dad locked himself away in his office, whereas my grandma had her own routine, a bizarre set of rituals she completed every morning without fail. It would start with making a hearty porridge mixed with nuts and berries, which was laid by the base of a small oak tree. She would then stand facing towards the woods and write small notes on paper before burying them in the earth. The last and most peculiar of all ceremonies was when she would then unravel a spool of red thread, circling the border of the house, intertwining it in between the trees. She used the same string to make my dad and I bracelets, which she adorns around our wrists. When I would question her behavior, she would give me a small smile and say, "Mind your business now, Luke." As for myself, I let my imagination run wild, making games for myself to keep occupied, sometimes even going to the creek to try and catch a fish. There were not many people nearby, let alone kids I could play with. Grandma's neighbors to the south had a daughter my age, around 14, with frizzy hair and freckles named Maggie. I was coming to the age where girls were just starting to get my attention and felt a slight wave of nausea when I saw her butterflies in my stomach. I didn't have a car to take me anywhere or money to spend. As such, I was grateful when Maggie would drop by whenever she could escape her chores so that we could hang out. It was a scorcher of a day in early July, and after playing outside in the morning, I was laying down on my back in the living room, staring at the ceiling and marinating in my own sweat. Grandma came through holding a hamper of wet laundry and took her foot, poking me in the ribs. "Come on now, Luke. No point wasting the day. Help me hang the washing outside." While the house had a dryer, she was insistent on air drying, claiming the sun made the clothes smell better, rolling over on my stomach. I let out a moan of protest before following. The line was tied up by the side of the house, between two magnificent oak trees, red string tied at their bases. "The pins are in the coffee bin over there," Grandma said, indicating with her chin. It was what she called a white laundry day, the one time of the month when she would clean all our sheets and the tablecloths. I took a handful of pins, stringing up the ivory and beige linens which billowed around me like dancing ladies. When I needed more, I went back to the bucket, looking up as I did. To my surprise, I saw my grandma walking in the distance towards the woods. Her back turned to me. Curious and abandoning my laundry duties, I scampered after her. She was a good quarter-mile away from me, but walking painfully slowly. Grandma, wait up," I yelled. She was standing toward the periphery of the woods, her graying white hair braided and flapping behind her like a dog's tail. I felt something seize my wrist, and like a boomerang, I snapped back, craning my neck. It was Grandma, clenching tight. "No further now, Luke. No further." Was I dreaming? My eyes went back to the figure in front of me, standing still. I sucked in my breath, turning again to the familiar face of my grandma. Her eyes were wide, the white stained red from broken blood vessels. She pulled me away, back in the direction of the house, her good hand like a vice around my arm. Walking away, I felt a cool breeze graze the back of my neck that sent a shiver of goosebumps down my arm. I let my gaze wander, returning to the person or thing still by the woods. This time it was faced towards me, her visage just like my grandma's, except for an insidious smile unfurling. I didn't say anything for the rest of the day and remained quiet during dinner, which was a gooey stew of potatoes and beef. My dad ate heartily, declaring it his favorite meal, placing his hands on his protruding belly. "Go on, dear." Grab a beer and watch some telly. I'll tuck Luke in, Grandma said with a sly eye. She brought up a large mug of tea, placed it on my nightstand, and sat on the corner of my bed. She rubbed her two remaining fingers together on her right hand and looked at me curiously. You see what I've been doing around the house every morning, have you, Luke? Yes, Grandma, I said, watching as her keen eyes narrowed in concentration. I need to tell you a story of sorts, but I'm going to need you to pay attention, just like if you were at school. Can you do that for me? I nodded my head. When I was young, maybe just a bit younger than you, my family and I moved here from Ireland. The reason we left our home was that my dad did something very, very bad. Grandma let out a sigh. When we came here, we carried something with us. It wasn't our luggage or anything we could see. We didn't even know how we brought it. I learned to think of it like a disease, a cold, except it didn't go away. My sister and I, in rudimentary terms, called it the isn't. Isn't it? I repeated. On account, we are the is, she said, bringing up her hand to her chest and placing it on her cherry-colored nightgown and then resting it on my knee. And the thing you saw out by the woods today isn't. I need you to pay attention real close now. There are 3 ways that this doesn't show itself, 3 different forms. The first being what you saw today. A person will come out of the woods on one side, walk across the field, and go into the forest again. Sometimes it'll be someone, other times it won't. But they'll always be moving slow. They don't talk or go anywhere else but that invisible straight line. Sometimes they'll stick out their hand as if they're asking you to take it. Whatever you do, make sure you don't take that hand. Do you understand me? Yes, I said. My mind was racing with questions, but I was hanging on to every word. The second way the isn't will come is through a nasty man that sometimes lingers by the property. I wouldn't want you talking to any strangers, but this man in particular. I've only seen him a couple of times, but he smells something awful, like sulfur and fruit past its prime. Be wary, as he's a tricky fella. He'll try and bargain with you, get you to trade something for something else. No matter what he has, whether it be gold coins or gemstones the size of my head, don't you dare trade with him. You'll have to say I won't trade before he'll go on his way. I felt sick to my stomach. Overwhelmed, the dinner from earlier began to gurgle and bubble in my stomach. I could feel the warm liquid entering my throat. The last, and the most horrible, in my opinion, is what it won't be like when it walks across the field. But this time it'll talk. Just as I'm talking to you here right now, it'll be an exact likeness, an undetectable difference. I remember one time I spent all day talking to a friend of my father's in the woods. Turned out it was in, and I was none the wiser. Grandma cleared her throat, and her voice lowered. There's a cave about 2 miles from the river. It's hidden, and if you walked by it, you might not even see it. But it runs deep, real deep. If I had to guess, that's where they live. When it isn't in its third form, it'll try to convince you to follow it into the cave. Don't follow it. No matter what. I bit my lip, feeling my body tremble. My heart raced under my cotton pajamas. What happens? What happens if you take the hand of the isn't, or bargain, or follow it into the cave? What happens? There was a weariness about my grandma. Her shoulders slumped forward. She let out a deep breath, about to say something, when my dad called. "Hey Ma, the dishwasher's acting up again," he said, his loud voice bellowing from downstairs. She got up from the bed, moving to the door frame, hesitating before she left. If any of those things happen, I won't be able to save you, Luke. I was riddled with anxiety with this newfound information and became increasingly anxious as I went about my days, always looking behind my shoulder, jumping at the slightest noise. Maggie lost her patience with me, saying that I reminded her of frayed rope and marching off towards her home. The first time I saw it again, I went running back into the house, locking my door and cowering underneath the covers. The second time I ran inside, but held my breath, looking out the window as it went past. The third time, I went about my business, all but ignoring the intrusion. They tended to materialize at odd hours at the brink of dawn or late at night. As it appeared, the birds, crickets, and all the other chatty wildlife would go mute, as if they sensed something abnormal, something wrong in their presence. Dice NTS had a clear preference towards my grandma's form, though sometimes it would be someone unrecognizable. A young girl, an old man, one time a wobbling toddler. I admittedly became complacent, underestimating the isn't. I got cocky. Leaning against one of the oak trees, I was staring out into the field when a young heavy-set woman, stark, naked, came into view. Her greasy hair clung to her bulging back fat that trembled as she moved. Her hands were clasped by her sides. She was moving with a sense of urgency, and for a moment I questioned if it was the isn't or a real person. As the isn't approached the woods on the other side, she turned, pushing out her hand as if she was willing, almost daring me to take it. I smirked, puckering my lips, taunting the invite. The woman's face remained unchanged as she began to convulse, her jello-like body violently moving back and forth, twisting and bending her back till her head was almost level with her knees. All the while, her eyes bore into me, never breaking contact, as she propelled herself into the forest. I was unnerved and retreated back to the house. I didn't see it for a week after that. In the meantime, I began seeing Maggie Moore, who asked me to take her into town for a movie. I agreed, not wanting to admit to myself that I was going on a date. The day of our big date arrived, and that afternoon I got my fishing gear, heading to the creek and parking myself under a large cedar tree, casting my line into the moving waters. My eyes felt heavy. The warm, glittering sun rays came down from atop the forest canopy. I dozed off. I awoke to a smell, a brutal and pungent combination of sulfur and rotten fruit that filled my nostrils, making my insides quake. Jolting upright, I surveyed my surroundings. In a moment of confusion, my panic subsided as everything around me looked normal. From where I was seated, the river pushed up against a bank on the other side, which stood about a foot taller, constructed of rocks and exposed tree roots withered away by the erosion. The trees opposite to me were blackened and mangled, deceiving my eyes to what was hidden amongst them. Just as my heart rate was beginning to drop, I saw a man standing across from me. He was camouflaged into the environment, clothed in decaying, matted clothes. He was skinny, gawky, and bent, his limbs elongated, and his body contorted in an unnatural way. Worst of all was his face. Like his garments, his skin was weathered with a consistency of tissue paper, pale to a light sickly green that his hollowed black eyes shone out from. He sauntered to the edge of the bank. He moved like a marionette, as if invisible strings were pulling at extremities, making them flail about in multiple directions. "That sure is a nice fish," he said, his voice deep and cluttered like he was gurgling stones as he spoke. From my position, my eyes went to the rod in front of him. On the hook was a fat, wiggling trout. A lapse of excitement and joy provided a needed alleviation from the isn't. As I pulled it onto the shore, basking in the glory of my catch, it was the biggest I'd caught yet, maybe a 10-pounder. "I'm mighty hungry," the gray-faced man said, opening his mouth. He had only several yellowed teeth that looked like they were just hanging on by a string of skin. He stuck out his tongue wide, white and bristly, making a smacking sound as it circled his lips. "Sorry," I said, heeding my grandma's advice not to trade, and I began to pack up my gear, anxious now to get away from the isn't. His mouth had become downturned, staring at me blankly. His expression reminded me of a look my neighbor's dog had when I finished a bit of food without giving him much. But I got so many things. The man opened his jacket, and out fell a pile of golden coins plopping into the water. His hand disappeared into his jacket pocket, retrieving a diamond the size of a baseball, shining in the light with clarity. "Anything you say. Anything you want." My mind went numb, seeing the treasures, continuing to pile in front of him. My eyes clung to gold as I drifted, thinking about bringing it home to my dad, telling him we wouldn't need to worry about money or him getting a job now, that we'd be okay, and all that just for a fish. It seemed foolish not to take the man up on his offer, downright stupid. He came closer, stepping down from the ridge with a long leg into the water, propelling himself a foot away from where I was standing. His smell was even more poignant than before. Up close, it became clear that the deteriorating flesh on his face was moving, festering with insects and maggots, their outlines indents underneath the skin. I caught my breath. "No, thank you," I said, spinning around, heading back towards home. Ahead, I could see the clearing of the field when my view became blocked by a shadow. It was him again, this time leaning against a tree. His face turned toward me in a crooked grin. "I'm hungry. Please feed me," he pleaded, sliding to the ground and crawling on all fours like a wounded animal. "Be merciful." "No," I said, crying now. I was petrified. The gray-faced man changed his demeanor, snarling, his chin jutted out. "Oh, come on, you little shit-eating maggot." He jumped back onto his feet, creeping towards me. "Give me the fish, or I'll slice you open." He began to laugh, a wicked cackle that made my blood run cold. He was singing, "Cut you open like a fish. Eat all your tiny bits. Your eyes, your nose, your juicy toes. Your goopy brain, I'll eat it up. Feed myself till I'm stuffed. Till there's nothing left of you. Lick your bones till they're clean. Throw them back to the stream." A line of drool fell from his mouth. He was licking and smacking away. "Here," I said and panicked. I threw the fish at him, leaving my rod behind and veering away. I ran hard till I was out of breath and my ribs hurt. Gasping, I made my way out of the forest. I could see Grandma's red house and shot myself towards its direction. Stumbling towards the entrance, I heard my name look. Turning my head, there was Maggie. She'd straightened her unruly hair and was wearing a light blue summer dress. She looked as lovely as a cold pitcher of lemonade on a hot summer day. In the midst of everything, I'd forgotten about our date, but I didn't feel well. "I just don't feel so good," I said. I didn't know what to say, so I looked at the ground, avoiding eye contact with her. "Hey, don't worry about it. Why don't we have a picnic tomorrow?" she said. "You can make the sandwiches, though. I'll come by around noon." She waved goodbye. I declined dinner that night and took a shower, the water scalding hot. I scrubbed myself till my skin was pink. As the water washed over me, I ran through the events of the day. I didn't break any rules. I didn't trade with a strange gray-faced man. I should be fine. I repeated the words like a lullaby. The storm had come in. The rain was splattering on the window pane as thunder murmured not too far away. I couldn't sleep as I lay on the bed. Eyes open when I smelt it again, that rotten egg smell. Stumbling out of bed, I went to the window, looking out onto the field and squinting to see if I could see he wasn't. There was a loud thump below me. Looking downwards, I jumped back. Clinging to the base of a swinging tree was the gray-faced man holding and climbing upwards, his monstrous limbs bent like Dad-at-long-legs. He shot me a smile, his mouth opening with those horrible jagged teeth. I fell, hitting the wood flooring and scooting to the wall where I sat paralyzed. Amongst the howling wind, there was a sound of scurrying. He was inching his way closer. A loud boom of thunder was followed by lightning that lit up the sky, and as it did, the gray-faced man came into view in front of my window. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. My throat sealed shut. My window being opened emitted a sharp squeaking sound as a gust of wind forced its way in, along with that terrible smell. And there he was, his neck extended in my room. Drool and rain dripped onto the floor from his pocket. He took out the trout from earlier. "Good eats," he said, ripping into the fish's flesh. Chunks of meat scattered onto his clothes and his face. He sucked away at its eyes, popping them into his mouth, licking the dead carcass. Extending his arm, he opened his hand, revealing a palm full of precious gems, colorful rubies, emeralds, and sapphires that glistened in the dark. "Trade," he said, gurgling. Something clicked inside my head. "No, no," I screamed. "I don't want to trade with you." As I said it, the lights in his eyes went out like a candle being extinguished. He slunk back from the window, retreating into the night, heaving with tears running down my face. The door of my bedroom was flung open. My dad went for the light switch, flooding my room in warm yellow light. "Luke, what the hell?" He looked at me, his face contorted in concern. A dead fish lay on the wet floor. Later, I pressed my ear against the door as I could hear my father yelling at my grandma that night as the storm raged on. I only caught bits of it. "You pulled the same shit on me when I was younger. How dare you scare him? Terrorize him with your bullshit jewel. Never see us again." The next morning the weather subsided. and there seemed to be a relative peace in the house. Sitting at the breakfast table, my eyes went back and forth between my grandma and dad like a ping pong ball, trying to glean some indication of what had happened when my dad put his breakfast plate in the sink, retreating upstairs. My grandma, whose gaze had been downwards, met my stare and indicated for us to go outside. I told her what had happened with the gray-faced man near the river and the night before. She made a tootang sound when I mentioned how I gave him the fish. When I was done talking, she let out a sigh. "You got lucky, my Luke. This doesn't seem to be more brazen than from what I remember. Never seen it come by the house, not even close." She picked up a wet piece of string on the ground, examining it. "I promised your dad I wouldn't hang the red thread anymore. They don't like red." Towards the tree line, a figure emerged. It was in my grandma's form. I'd become so used to it by now, I didn't even bat an eye. "Can't we show him?" I said. "I mean, if he sees you here and it isn't over there that looks like you, he'll have to believe it's real. Won't he? I'm afraid trying to show him anything now will just make him angrier." There was sadness in her eyes. "And just so you know, that's not my form. Yuzuin isn't." I looked at her, confused. "It's my twin sister. Margaret's form." She was touching her mutilated right hand as she spoke. I knew that my grandma had a sister, but not that they were twins. She didn't take her when we were barely 13. A tear slid down her cheek, and she held up her right hand, sticking out her 2 remaining fingers. And it almost got me, too. "I found out about the cave the hard way," Grandma said. "My sister and I had seen him walking through the field and had come across the trading man. We thought we understood it in all its ways and forms, that we could outweed it. Then one day we were in the woods, playing by the creek, when my dad's friend came upon us. He was a nice man who'd helped when we moved in, come around dinner once a month or so. He told us he wanted to show us something. Silly girls, we followed him to the cave like little puppies. We'd taken a few steps inside when I felt something grab my hand and heard my sister cry in pain. There was a chuckle deep in the dark as it drew us closer, eating away at us. I think if I was on my own, I wouldn't have stood a chance, or if I didn't happen to be wearing red that day. I fought, and he didn't let me go. Not without taking something very dear to me. My fingers. I held my breath, and Grandma gave me a pat on the shoulder. It wears the forms of the ones it keeps. Sometimes when he doesn't come as Margaret, I'll catch a glimpse of her, the real her. It's a feeling more than anything else, like she's still there, living inside it. It's why I leave the porridge out every morning, her favorite meal, just in case she gets hungry, just in case there's ever a way to get her back. "Haven't you ever eaten it?" I asked. "A few times. It probably means nothing. But I gotta keep hoping, Luke." Grandma's rituals were beginning to make sense. It wasn't scared of red thread. Grandma left out the porridge for Margaret. What about the pieces of paper she wrote on every day? What about the notes? I asked. Grandma tilted her head. "I suppose that's more for me. I write down prayers, thought, really. Anything I can remember about her. I saw someone do it in Ireland once. They said it would help them find what was lost." She drifted off, looking in the distance towards the isn't that was disappearing back into the woods. "It's been a long night, Luke. I think I'm going to go lay down." She got up, walked back into the house, and remembered. "If you come across this as the trading man again, don't give him anything." I continued to sit there alone, staring out into the forest in front of me. Though still shaken from the night before and the strangeness of the isn't, at least I knew all its ghastly tricks, a notion that put me at relative ease. I went inside to start making sandwiches for the picnic. Maggie and I had planned for later that day. At noon, I stood waiting on the porch. I found an old basket, placing the 2-egg salad sandwiches and several bottles of Coke inside it. I saw Maggie walking up the road and began heading in her direction. "It's hot out," she said, shading her face from the sun. "Let's find some shade." Taking my hand, she led me against my reservations into the woods. I couldn't tell her about it. I didn't want to seem like a baby, so I held my tongue. After walking for a little while, she found a spot that suited her, and we sat down to eat. When we were done, She lay down on the grass, turning her head towards me, her hair fanned out on the ground. We shared a kiss, and then Maggie said she'd be right back, standing up, Coke bottle in hand. My heart was beating fast as I felt a wave of excitement rush over me. Looking over my shoulder, I couldn't see Maggie and was anxious for her return. And then I smelled something. Standing up, I began walking in the direction I'd seen her go just minutes before. I heard her voice, and rounding a corner, she was in front of me, a wide smile on her face. In her hand, where the Coke bottle used to be, was the fishing rod I dropped yesterday. Some guy just traded me the rest of my Coke for this, she said, holding it up. I mean, it's weird, but kind of cool. She took a step towards me, but something was behind her, the gray-faced man with a grin. He grabbed Maggie by the waist. "Hey, let me go, you creep," Trait said this isn't, tightening his grip, and she let out a sharp moan of pain. "Good eats," said the gray-faced man, pulling Maggie even closer, towering above her. He slid out his disgusting white tongue, slobbering and gumming at Maggie's neck. She cried out in protest. When he released himself, her shoulder was covered in a mucus-like substance. "Trade for her." "Luke, help me," Maggie pleaded, tears running down her face. I shook my head and began to cry. "I'm so sorry, Maggie. I can't." "What?" "Please help me," she wailed, which turned into screams as she began to hurt her. "Trade," he said again, and I looked downwards, unable to bear it anymore. I heard a crunch and screaming as blood splattered across my face. Her cries turned into pleading, lessening in their intensity, and then just ragged breathing and wheezing. At last, all that was left was the sound of chewing, and then I ran without looking back, tears in my eyes as I made my way home. Thoughts raced through my mind. How would I tell my grandma Maggie's parents? How could I tell them I did nothing to save her? I was a coward. I screamed in frustration, hurling myself from the forest towards a field. I felt arms around me. Someone caught me. And when I looked up, it was my grandma, holding on to me with ferocity. "Thank God you're okay." She wrapped me close, and I let out a wail. "I saw you walking into the woods with Yizin, and I damn near lost my mind." I took a step back. "What?" It took me a minute. I haven't seen her use my sister's form like that in over 60 years. She held out a photo in her trembling hand. It was old, black and white. It was two girls, identical in every way. Both of them looked exactly like Maggie. "You mean Maggie wasn't real?" "She wasn't Maggie," Grandma said the name softly. "Gosh," she sighed. "That was Margaret's nickname." I sat down, relieved and disgusted. I told my grandma everything. "I don't know what to think," I said. I felt empty and depleted, as if my whole body had been emptied out. "How can you know what's real here?" I said. "Maggie, I mean Margaret. She seems so much like a person." I felt myself blush, remembering our kiss. "It's why I gave you the bracelets of the red string, Luke." Grandma said, looking at me, "From now on, always wear it, and don't trust anyone around here who doesn't." A laughter came from the woods, and we both turned towards the sound, standing still. The trees shimmied in the wind. The leaves rustled. In the depths of the forest, I thought I could see two yellow eyes looking back at me. "We're dealing with something very evil here," said Grandma. "It's funny how you learn to take things for granted. How I thought I was the only one that mattered. My universe was so limited." I reeled in the revelation of Maggie, making sure to stay out of the woods. Grandma spent more and more time weaving her red string around the house, immersed in her rituals. We both didn't pay attention. For a moment, it felt like this might not be done with us, like a weight had been lifted. A month after my first encounter with a gray-faced man, things on the property were quiet. There was a sense of normalcy. I started going fishing by the creek again. I was alert, but I felt safe. I was coming back from fishing with no prize in tow when I saw my dad tinkering with a car. Looking up at me, he waved me over. "No luck?" I shook my head. "They're not biting today." My dad wiped his hands on his shirt. "Hey, you want to go for a walk? I've been cooped up all day, applying for jobs. I could use just a little break." "Sure," I said, and we went towards the woods. Dad started talking, saying how sorry he was for leaving me alone all summer, that he had some good leads, and that we'd be able to get out of here soon. I don't mind it here, I said, and it was true, even with everything that had happened. You're a good kid, Luke. Sometimes my mom, though, well, she just drives me crazy with all the nonsense she talks about. Thanks for putting up with it all. I'm proud of you, bud. You're turning out to be a fine young man. The sense of pride filled me, and I puffed out my chest a little. We continued walking. I wasn't really paying attention to where we were going when my dad held out his arm, blocking me from going any further. Well, would you look at that? Directly in front of us was a large rock embedded into the foot of a hill. There was an opening in front of us. It was a cave. I felt my blood run cold. Dad, let's get out of here, I said, taking a step back. What? Are you kidding? Look how cool this is. Come on, don't be a baby. He took my hand, and I looked down. What happened to your bracelets? The ones Grandma gave you. The red ones. There was a quizzical look on his face. I told you, Vuk. I don't believe in all that crazy shit. He pushed his head forward. Come on, bud. Let's go. I let go of his hand, moving away from him, tears falling down my face. You got him, didn't you? Well, it's your loss, Luke, he said. With a grin, it disappeared into the cave. You sure you don't want to join me? It sure is cool here. You're missing out, bud. Then there was another voice, but this time it was Maggie's. Please help me, Luke. It's so dark here. From the cave, a deep laugh erupted, starting low and then building until the cavernous sides began to quake. I let out a yelp, hightailing it back to my grandma's house. And when I got there, I flung open the doors to my dad's office. It was covered in a thin layer of dust, and he was gone. I ran outside calling for my grandma, screaming for her. She was in the garden and came around to the front. And as she did, she emerged from the woods. In my father's form, walking that invisible line across the field, Grandma let out a howl and fell to her knees. This still doesn't come to us, though not as often. We keep to our routines. Every morning, Grandma and I tie up the red string around the trees, creating our barrier. We now place 2 bowls of food outside, one of porridge, the other of beef stew. We write our notes to the ones we've lost, the ones we've loved, placing them on the earth to remember them. I'll keep writing notes like this, Dad. These words are for you. Just in case you're still out there. Just in case there's ever a way back for you. Just in case what's lost can be found. I'll keep trying. I'll always keep trying. We all have secrets, don't we? Even when we were only kids. Most secrets are stupid things at that age. Things you look back on and you laugh about. My secrets, though, were stranger. How could this have happened? I heard that a lot in the months after. My mom whispered it a lot as we watched the paramedics wade out of the water, a stretcher carried between them. It was written in the newspaper beneath the pictures of me and my friends, bold like an accusation, a question no one could answer. Then once again after the funeral, when Robbie's dad slid to the floor in front of us all and just sat crying, I heard him say it as a couple of the other dads helped him up and took him home, his broken voice fading into the distance. I remember the awkward silence that followed. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. How could this have happened? We lived in one of the safest towns in the entire country. Whole population was hardly 2,000, and I knew every name, even at my age. The most heinous local crime had been perpetrated by my own uncle, drunk, driving his new Chevy into some parked cars on Main Street. And then everything changed in a single night. I walked back through the remains of our town. The streets are always empty now. Silent homes with dark windows. Fallen leaves clung to every surface. The mist was so thick it soaks you through. I left Matthew's house about an hour ago. I took the hill road. That winds down to the bay. Moonlight filtered through the trees. You can see the whole valley on the first few turns. The forest is reclaiming this place. Branches hung over roads and abandoned homes. We'd started taking backyards and driveways. Hurts to see it. I try telling myself it's just something that happens. Towns fade away, folk leaving for 100 different reasons. But this was our town. This was my home. You understand? I ended up at my parents' place now, if I can still call it that. They moved years ago, and I've been trying and failing to sell it for them ever since. Nobody's interested. Even the few who come to see it, they never call again. Whole town's the same people. They just don't want to come back. The phone was ringing when I came in the door. I had that sinking feeling in my stomach as I reached for it, knowing it would be Matt's wife, Celia. I know why she'd be calling. He's gone, she said, her voice more tired than anything. After a moment, I started to say I was sorry, but she'd already hung up, and I don't blame her. She'd read about what happened to us when we were boys, and she was smart enough to realize there was more to it, more than Matt would ever tell her. Took it to his grave in the end. I think she hates me for being part of the secret that hurt him so much. I don't blame her for that either. I put the phone down and sat watching it, waiting for something else. I don't know what. Eventually, I made some coffee and I let it go cold. I took my coat off and kept it on my lap, breathing heavily like I'd run a marathon. Matthew gone at 59. At least I saw him before the end. What the cancer left of him, anyway. I'd known Matt since kindergarten. When we looked so alike, people thought we were brothers. I thought of the three of us together, me and Matt and Robbie, boys with their whole life ahead of him. And then I had to stop because I could feel tears coming on. And that's when I started writing this. God knows why. I suppose I got a story to tell and no one to tell it to. Honestly, I didn't even know if I could do it. If I could finally speak about what happened. If the spell was broken. But here we are. I guess there's no one left to hide it from. When I was 5 years old, my imaginary friend saved my life. I know, stupid. Just give me a minute. She was the same age as me, short, dark hair and olive skin, bright eyes and a smile. She came to my bedroom window, and she would sit on the ledge, just swinging her feet. We whispered to each other so my parents didn't hear, talking till the sun sank and the air grew cold. I never saw her anywhere else, and I never even knew her name. In my head, she was always just a girl. From my earliest memories of her, I understood she wasn't a person like me. I saw her vanish once after leaving through the window. She disappeared before her feet touched the grass. I accepted this as only a young child can. That line between reality and fantasy hadn't really been formed yet at that age. How long had I known her? What did we talk about? I don't honestly know. How much do you remember from that age? But the first time I can really remember any details about one of her visits, well, it was before the fire in '68. My parents were away for the night, so I was staying with my aunt and uncle. They had no kids of their own, so I got a sleeping bag in the spare room. The girl's voice woke me up in the dark of night. I remember I wasn't scared, just a little surprised seeing her anywhere other than my room. But there she was, sitting on the floor like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Get up, Jamie," she whispered quickly. I remember sitting up and rubbing my eyes. Coughed, and I realized there was a smell of smoke in the air. "There's a fire downstairs. You need to get out," she said, pointing to the door. I heard the crackle of the flames, saw the light of the blaze shining onto the lawn outside. Quickly, "Jamie, the back door," she pointed. I ran to the hall, shouting for my aunt and uncle as I ran to their room. Truth be told, it's all a blur after that. I remember seeing my aunt sit up in bed, hearing my uncle shout, and then a crash from downstairs and all of us coughing. My eyes started stinging, and there was a blast of heat before we rushed into the chilly night air. The three of us made it out all right, but it was too late for that house. Not even the arrival of the fire department could save it. I didn't find out what caused the fire till years later. It seems my uncle had too much to drink, started cooking something, then forgot about it and went to bed. It would be a lie to say it wasn't like him. My parents took me home in the morning. There was a coldness between our families that I never felt before. It was the final straw between my father and his brother. To my knowledge, they never spoke again. His wife left him soon after, and he disappeared from town. God knows whatever happened to him. Anyway, the next night back home, my friend visited again. I was lying wide awake. wondering if she would. You saved lives last night, she told me. You're a hero. Now, I wasn't sure of that, but I was a young boy, and it made me feel good, so I took it. I remember her leaning back out the window and looking up to the sky, one half smile on her lips as always. Remember, James, she said, I'll always watch out for you, but you have to keep me a secret, okay? If you tell anyone about me, I can't ever come back. I won't tell anybody, I said. You promise? Her eyes twinkled. I promise, I said. Swear. Her smile grew wider. I swear, I said. She gave a little laugh, face lit in the moonlight, and then she was gone. Seasons went by. Birthdays and Christmas, Halloween and Thanksgiving. Mom walked me to school on weekdays, and Dad drove us to church on Sundays. 3 years passed like this, safe and familiar. My closest friends in those years were Matt and Robbie. I already knew Matt when we started class together. His family only lived straight away. He had one sister, 2 black Labradors, and too many cats to count. He was confident and outgoing in all the ways I wasn't, so we made a great team. Robbie, we first met in school. He was always the biggest kid in class. He could pass for a few years older, and he acted like it too. His family had only arrived in town at the start of the year. They moved into the old house by the lakeside. Robbie's father was a strange one. The man was nice as pie with other parents around, but cold as ice otherwise. Half the time he treated his son like the boy didn't exist. Other times, like Robbie was a stranger. His mother was nicer, but spoke to us even less than her husband. She had a strong accent and a scar on her cheek that she covered up with too much makeup. Matt, Robbie, and we did everything together. It got so there was no point planning anything without planning for 3. I still treasure these memories, I do, but they've grown bittersweet. There's a touch of pain with every memory now. It was the next June when I saw the girl again. My mom was watching TV downstairs. I think my dad was out front working on the car. I was in my room reading. There was only the night light beside my bed. I was drifting off in the summer night. My memories of the girl had faded as the years went by. I'd begun to doubt myself. Had she even been real? Maybe I dreamt her. 8-year-old me looked at 5-year-old me like it was 100 years ago. I didn't think I would ever see her again. I was too old to believe in something like that, wasn't I? But all of a sudden, poof, she was there, real as your me. Hello, Jamie. Do you remember me? Her voice rang out, and I got the scare of my life. I was about to call for my dad when I did recognize her. She had aged as I did, but not so much that I didn't know those eyes. More than anything, though, it was the aura she brought that triggered my memory. How do I explain it? It was like being with her had a dreamlike quality, like being a little drunk and a little sleepy. The whole world felt further away except for her and her voice. I remember. I replied, trying to sound more sure than I was. I sat up and my book fell to the floor. Shush, she said. Don't let anyone know I'm here. She was real, I thought. Not a dream or my imagination. I've come to help you again, James. I know when you're in danger, I can feel it. I can't always tell exactly when or how, but I know it's close. Now you and your friends are in terrible danger, she told me. Matt, Robbie, how? I asked. I was staring at her, still amazed. In fact, I'm sure my mouth was hanging open, likely looking like an idiot. I've kept you safe all these years, she said. You know that, don't you? I'll keep you safe this time, too, but I need your help. I don't understand. What? What's going to happen? I asked. I can't be sure. Not yet. All I know is that you or your friends will be hurt, and only you can stop it, she said. I heard the back door. My father was coming in and heading upstairs. She swung her legs back out the window. Remember, James, like before, keep me a secret, she whispered. I will, I said. You promise? She replied, a seriousness in her eyes. I promise, I replied. Do you swear? She said, smiling, and I smiled back, suddenly remembering our words from years before. I swear, I said. The rest of the summer was like any other hot days filled with swatting flies as we hiked through the forest, jumping in the lake and riding bikes till we could hardly see home every day. I found myself thinking about the girl. Should I tell someone about her? What danger could we be in? In the end, I chose to keep quiet. She'd saved me once before, hadn't she? Surely she deserved a little trust. That was the same July Robbie ran away from home. He went off into the hills for a night until Officer McKinn found him. He was eating Pop Rocks and trying to make a fire. We knew something was wrong with him the day before. Robbie was muttering under his breath and cursing like his father. He never told us why he did it, never once even spoke about it. It wasn't long after that. Matt brought up the three of us going camping again. The previous year, we had stayed overnight on the small island out on the lake. It was only 50 yards from Robbie's house on the shore, so it was just safe enough to get past our parents. Even at that age, we could have waded over, but we used our canoes to get to the island. It felt like more of an adventure that way. After a campfire and enough candy to make us all sick, we shared a tent for the night. Robbie's dad told our parents he would keep an eye on us last time. Said he'd come over for regular checks and watch our campfire. He didn't actually do any of that, but because we didn't want to cause trouble, we told our families he did. Well, August soon arrived. The days were growing shorter, the nights colder. It was the last week that would be warm and dry enough to camp out, so we got the okay from our parents for that Saturday. The girl came to see me the night before. All I could make out was a hushed voice in the dark, her silhouette in the open window. It's going to happen tomorrow night, James, on the island. I'm sure of it. If we know that, can I just stay away? I asked her. She shook her head. Whatever is going to happen, I know only you can stop it. You're still brave enough, aren't you? If you don't go, it will be worse for your friends. I'm certain of it. Just do as I say when the time comes and trust me. You can do it, James. I believe in you. Do you trust me? I do. I swear. I promised. I lay awake half the night after she'd gone. I wanted to wake up my parents. I wanted to call Matt or Robbie. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but even the thought of doing so made my throat tighten. What would they say? What would they think? What if I made things worse like she said? And then whatever happened would be my fault and the girl would never visit me again. I left for Robbie's house after dinner, grabbing my backpack and saying goodbye to my parents. When I reached the back door through the kitchen, the girl was there waiting for me. Jamie, take a knife from the kitchen, a sharp one, she said, pointing back to the house. What? Why? I asked. Jamie, stop it. You're the only one who can save your friends. I need you to be brave. I don't think you'll need the knife. But what if you do and you don't have it? She said urgently. I hesitated. I didn't really want to do it, but I snatched a knife from the drawer and I rushed out. I'll put it back as soon as I'm home, I thought. Maybe nobody will even notice. I rode my bike to the lake, the sun low, but still warm on my face. When I got there, Matt and Robbie were standing by the canoes. They were looking impatient or angry with each other. I wasn't sure which or why. As for me, I couldn't hide my nerves. I kept touching my pocket where the knife was, no matter how much I tried to stop. We paddled across in silence, the plastic oars cutting through the reflections of the sky. The sun sank between the hills, and giant clouds moved overhead. We pulled our canoes onto the shore, walked into the trees, and picked a spot for our tent and campfire. Looked like the same spot as the year before, but I couldn't be sure. That's when the girl spoke to me again, although I couldn't see her. Jamie said you're going to collect firewood. Her voice drifted in the wind. I froze. I looked at Matt and Rob starting on the tent, but they gave no sign they heard her. I mumbled something about going for wood and then walked off. Neither of them answered. That dreamlike quality which came with her had returned, but it was sharper somehow. It felt like 1,000 threads tightening around me. And then I heard Ray's voices. Robbie and Matt. I dropped the sticks and I ran back. They stood facing each other, a gun in Robbie's hand. I remember how strange it looked. Too big and awkward for his thin arm. We found out afterward he had stolen it from his mother. What are you doing? I asked. Because of him, Robbie said, shaking. Look, he's got a knife. He was going to kill us. I looked down and saw the glint of a blade in Matt's hand, his sleeve pulled down to cover it, and then the gun went off. I flinched from the sound, heart racing. Matt fell. There was a ringing in my ears. I saw Robbie scramble for the gun where it had jerked out of his hand, and then her voice again. Use the knife, Jamie. He's going to kill you. I looked down at the blade in my own hand. It was like an awful dream. All I had to do was what she asked, and I could wake up and be safe. Robbie's eyes were fixed on the body between us. I saw his face as he realized what he'd done and realized it was forever. He hadn't meant to fire. I knew him, and I knew that you had to stop him. The knife felt strange in my hand, almost weightless. But I saw Matt, and I knew I didn't have it in me to hurt anyone. No matter what I was told, no matter the consequences, I couldn't do it. And so I threw the knife on the ground. James. Her voice was so sharp I recoiled. What are you doing? Pick it up. No, I said. My words were weak, and I held back, crying. I can't. I heard Robbie then pleading, desperate like me. No, I won't do it, he was saying. He threw it away. He threw it away. And then it broke. The dreamlike state fizzled out, and we were just two scared boys in the dark. What a disappointment. Her voice had changed. She laughed. Two cowards failed me at the last moment. This could have been perfect. Well, we'll just have to make do with what we have, she said. Robbie stared at me, confusion showing. We both had heard her, I realized. She wanted us to. You can hear her, he said. There were sounds now from the opposite shore, raised voices. Robbie glanced away, terrified. The gun hung limp in his hand. My eye was drawn to the barrel, and I found I couldn't answer him. I'd frozen up with shock, and I couldn't even move. The girl spoke again, but not to me. Matt's dead and you killed him, Robbie. What are your parents going to say? What are they going to do? No, I didn't mean it. I didn't, he said. Oh, but you did. You killed one friend, and you were going to kill another. Jamie saw it all. The girl laughed. But you said he was going to hurt us. You said I was the only one who could stop it. I heard more shouting. People were splashing through water and getting close. Did I? She asked. Is that what I said? The girl in your imagination told you to kill Matt. What will his parents say to that? You killed their son. Is that your mother I hear? She loved you, and all you do is let her down, hurt her. What do you think she'll do now? You never stop hurting her, she said. Just like your father, Robbie's eyes met mine a final time. His hand steadied, and he raised the gun to his head. I heard more adult voices coming from the water's edge, but I couldn't turn away to look. And then the gun fired. Light flickered through the trees. I saw birds in the darkening sky. Oh, well, she said, both playful and disappointed. Not perfect, but it'll do. The three of you had fun while you lasted. Sleep tight. I heard the sounds of approaching feet, people calling our names. I could see both bodies on the ground. Someone was shaking me, but I couldn't move or answer. And then someone started screaming. I heard her screaming until it all went dark, and the only thing I can remember is the girl laughing. The months immediately after are filled with police, doctors, and other strangers with worried or angry faces. And then a lonely, endless emptiness in the days and nights which followed. I tried to hide from it all, but I had nowhere to go. Matt had survived, which was the only bright spot. Still, it was a close thing, and he spent until October in the hospital. I lost my voice for those first few weeks. I was only able to squeeze out the odd, meaningless sound. I couldn't even write. Any attempt to form words became a senseless jumble in my mind. The family doctor said it was trauma, but I knew the truth. It was a warning, a reminder that I couldn't speak of her. I'd sworn, hadn't I? I had sworn, and somehow I knew she would hold me to it. My mom often sat with me in those times, just holding my hand, talking to me about anything she could think of in the hope something would help. I can still see the look on her face, how it pained her to see me struggle. More than anything, I wanted to speak, but I just couldn't do it. My father. Well, he dealt with things in a very different way. He started withdrawing, started taking long walks, or sitting in his office for hours. I think he felt that he'd failed me somehow, that he hadn't been there to protect me when I needed him. I finally found my voice one night when I woke up from a nightmare. I called for my dad without even thinking, just as I had when I was a little boy. Dad was the first word I'd ever spoken, and here it was again. I remember he ran to my room and pulled me into his arms. And for a moment, one moment, in all the pain and guilt and fear, it was as if things could really go back to the way they were. I could speak again now, but still not about the girl, no matter how hard I wanted to. I wanted to tell the truth, no matter the consequences, but it was hopeless. My lips sealed tight every time I thought of her. I tried to write it down or even circle the words I needed in books, but my hand just froze as soon as I tried. When Matt left the hospital, I found that he'd been rendered mute as I had. His parents took him to multiple doctors and psychologists, but no improvement. He couldn't break the spell. It's okay, I told him the first time we were alone. I know our eyes met then, and he let out a long breath. His face was pale, and he started to cry. And that was the moment we both understood. There's no need for words. We would share this, but never speak of it again. We couldn't tell anyone, even if we tried. In time, he was able to start talking like I could, though the inability to discuss the girl had never worn off. I wondered how and when she visited him. Did he know how she'd lied to us? Did he still see her? I could never know for certain. All I could do was hope. Robbie's parents claimed the pistol had been locked in their safe and said their son didn't even know about the gun. I could guess at how he knew about it and how he knew the code to the safe. The girl told him I was sure of it. The town seemed split over how they felt about the couple. There were equal parts pity and anger. A lot of folk have been feeling that way about each other since the incident. His father fled town before the year was up and vanished without a trace. And then on Christmas Eve, his mom drove their car into the lake. She swerved to miss my uncle's ex-wife of all people. Sad as it was, his mother's death became lost under everything else that had happened. She died in the cold, dark water, and it keeps me awake at night wondering how she felt at the end. People spoke about that family like they brought this evil to our town, like they carried it here with them in their beat-up station wagon. Bullshit even if it was true. What if they had? I didn't realize the truth until it was too late. You see, I'd always imagined that we were the only ones she'd preyed on. That, I don't know, it was a one-off. It took me years to suspect any difference. In my defense, the incident caused my family to withdraw from the rest of town, or them from us. I don't know. No doubt it led to Matt's parents' decision to leave, moving away the year before we started high school. We kept in touch, but I didn't see him again until we were nearly 20. So I was on my own. 2 years after Robbie's death, there was another murder. A group of teenagers on the other side of the valley were down by the lake. They were listening to music and sharing a stolen bottle of whiskey. Before the sun had set, one had died and 4 others were seriously hurt. Despite everything the police and parents tried over the years, no one ever got the truth. None of the kids involved would speak a word about it. I'd seen them the day before at the football field, laughing and joking without a care in the world the following summer. The Goldsmith family had cops and paramedics at their house. They managed to keep the details quiet, but every one of them moved away in the next year, leaving 3 empty homes. The children never went to school at that time. The adults left their jobs. Some kids I knew said that they only saw 14-year-old Lily Goldsmith with a red scarf around her neck. Our town, it always had a few odd stories. People seeing lights above the marshes or drunk fishermen claiming they hear voices on the water. Harmless campfire tales. But now the name of our town became synonymous with tragedy, and these were only the incidents we knew about when I was 16. The local mechanic, Oliver Miller, drowned his wife in their bathtub. His son caught him in the act and stabbed him clean through the heart. It was on the news for weeks. I walked past their empty house on the way to school, and then it was Father Colby. One Sunday, he locked the doors of the church and tried to set the place on fire with his congregation inside. My dad and a couple of others managed to stop him, but he died of a stroke before they got him to the hospital. There's a devil among us, Father Colby had told people, wild-eyed and shaking. His last words were, "I've seen her." She always did like fire, I thought. I began to look at everyone differently, wondering if she came smiling to their windows at night. How long had she been here? Were we even her first victims? When I was 18, my dad pulled a gun on our neighbor, a man he'd been friends with for 30 years. My mom got between them, and the gun went off. The shot was only inches from killing her. She forgave my father immediately, like it was nothing. He would never hurt her, she said. He'd never hurt anyone. It was just a moment of madness. He hadn't been himself, she said. My dad hardly said anything after it happened, other than to beg them both for forgiveness between the three of them. They decided not to involve the police, but any friendship with our neighbor was clearly over. I don't think they ever spoke again. I remember sitting with my father the next week, just the two of us in the yard. He'd grown pale in such a short time, thinner and hesitant, a gentle man broken by something he'd almost done. He was shocked and ashamed of himself. He was looking out at the forest. He sighed and shook his head, as if struggling with something, trying to find the words. He would never talk of it again, no matter how much I forced it. More often than not, my own voice failed me whenever I tried to talk about the girl. And then a few months later, my mother told us we were going to move. I'm leaving again tonight, and I won't be back. She can have this place to herself, a ghost on her own, laughing in the dark. Maybe that's what she wanted all along. I've often wondered if she still watches me even now. Will I wake up tonight and see her in my window, smiling? Will I hear her laugh again before I open my eyes, or has she left us behind? Maybe she's starting again in a new town. If not me, then who does she visit? All I can say is that I hope you never see her. How do I explain my job? Imagine you work at a convenience store, and the sodas in the fridge started talking to you. It's kind of like that. Yeah, I think that about sums it up. But instead of a cashier, I'm a mortuary assistant. I work in a morgue under a hospital, and a few months back, the corpses started talking to me. Now I know that sounds unbelievable, psychotic, unhinged. But honestly, the dead bodies sitting up and spilling their guts, it isn't even the worst part. It's the things they tell me that make my guts twist. I guess I should start at the beginning. I've always been a good listener. That's one of those natural skills that you can't really learn. You're just born with it. The shoulder to cry on, the sympathetic ear, or any other body parts that can be a cushion for someone's thoughts, desires, and fears. That's me. I remember being around 12 or 13 years old and having a deep, serious conversation with my father. Conversations that a man probably shouldn't be having with his son. But our relationship was always different. Growing up without a mom will do that, I guess. We were always more like friends than a dad and his kid. We'd talk about dad's life, his work, how much he missed mom sometimes, how much he really wanted a drink. But I thought it was all for the better. I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't turn out the way I did. I wouldn't have been blessed. In the beginning, being a corpse handler was something that I sort of fell into by complete accident. I was young at the time, barely starting college. My then girlfriend had a dream of opening her own funeral home, and in a stroke of complete genius and infatuation, I decided that I'd join her. We'd complete school together and start our own joint venture, a funeral home to call our own, the stuff of romance. Well, as you can guess, things didn't work out between us in the end. But I did find that I was honestly fascinated by the job. I'd always been interested in that stuff since Mom died. I was never someone who got queasy at the sight of a bloody injury or a nasty car accident. The first time I actually worked on a dead body, it just felt natural to me. It felt as natural as, well, listening to people's problems. I spent my entire life as a kind of sounding board for the people I care about. Everyone trusted me with their deepest secrets. I don't even think it's that I give the best advice or have the perfect solution to every problem. I usually don't, if I'm being truthful. But sometimes people just need to be heard. Lately, though, when it comes to my work, my listening skills have been a bit of a problem. I was more than happy being a low-level assistant. I just wanted an easy job that would let me turn my brain off as I wheeled bodies around. The atmosphere and pace of this type of gig suited me just fine. That's how I started in this field, and it's pretty much where the normal part of the story ends. Things just got so much worse. I've been working at a hospital in St. Clair and slinging dead bodies around for about 3 years when they asked me to swap to the night shift. I thought about it for a bit. Pay was better by a few dollars, and I've always been a night person on top of everything else, so I agreed. I didn't even have any of the typical fears or hang-ups you'd expect. The idea of being alone at night with tons of dead bodies didn't really scare me. I knew that the corpses were just that, dead. At least I thought so. God, if I could go back in time, I'd strangle myself on the spot before accepting this job. So, like I said, things started out normally enough. Well, enough for a morgue in the basement of a hospital, at least. It wasn't unusual to see messed up, twisted bodies of all colors, shapes, and sizes. There's a lot of different ways a human can die in a major hospital. They didn't all talk, though. Not at first. The first time it happened, I thought my coworker Dave was playing a prank on me. It was 3 a.m. We just wheeled in the corpses of an elderly man and woman. Their respective causes of death weren't immediately obvious to me. There were no fatal injuries that I could see, so I thought old age was probably a safe bet. We just transferred the first body from the gurney to the slab. I had my back to Dave, filling out some paperwork about the old man. It was going as normally as you'd expect, when a voice cut through the still air. It was that kind of dry, throaty voice that could only belong to something not from this world. It's funny, humans just have some innate ability to sense when something is wrong. My hand froze, the pen hovering over the paper as the raspy voice let out a single word: guilt. Now, at that moment, I'll admit I wasn't really scared. I just laughed and turned around, expecting to see Dave with a stupid grin. Very funny, I quipped. Dave still had his back turned, but he turned around and raised an eyebrow when he heard me. Killed, I repeated in a half-assed attempt with a zombie voice. The confused look never left Dave's face. What does that mean? He seemed genuinely lost. I chuckled again, a little more hollow this time. Didn't you just? I trailed off before I could finish the question. Dave rolled his eyes. Yeah, good one. Anyway, listen, I need to run to the bathroom. He didn't wait for my response as he set his clipboard down and left me alone with the two bodies. The room went deathly silent as I heard Dave's footsteps receding up the hall. The only sound left was the hum of the fluorescent lights above my head. I stood there alone, standing still in the freezing morgue. There was just this feeling, like something hanging in the air, some sort of aura. I didn't know how to describe it. My eyes were now locked on the body directly in front of me. The old man. His eyes were closed, his skin pale and wrinkled. I held my breath, and then there was a sound like bones cracking, and the faint squeak of aged and dry rubber wheels rolling gently on cold linoleum killed. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as that same hoarse voice drifted through the air. It felt like it was worming its way between my ears and into my brain, and it was coming from behind me. From the other body, slowly I turned to face her. I felt the color drain from my face as I saw it was waiting behind me. The dead woman was sitting up on her gurney. Her eyes were still scrunch closed, but a stiff grin had spread across her previously blank face, her face that was supposed to be dead. I could see her body had begun showing signs of breaking down. Her flesh was discolored and turning purple. Her gray hair was a wiry rat's nest from being roughly transported to the morgue from wherever she had died. I watched in horror as her mouth slowly opened, exposing teeth stained brown from years of smoking. The voice drifted out from her rotting throat again. But it wasn't like the dead woman was speaking. It was almost like her body was just the vessel for a voice coming from another place, like some kind of demented ventriloquist act. Her mouth didn't move. It simply hung open as the withered voice repeated that single word again. Killed, she said. I felt my knees getting weak. Sweat beaded on my forehead. Where the hell was Dave? I guess I still held out a bit of hope that this was all an elaborate joke. And then a cold, clammy hand grasped my shoulder. I didn't need to turn around to know. I already knew who it was. I didn't even hear him get up. Another one of those awful voices from the pit of hell whispered directly in my ear. Have you ever felt someone whisper in your ear the heat of their breath? Almost like there's a warmth to what they're saying. You feel their humanity in every word. There was no humanity here. No breath, no warmth. Just icy, alien, nothing. The dead man croaked out two words. Our son. I shut my eyes tight, feeling my body shudder in horror. When I opened them, I was in the same room, under the same lights, still staring at a corpse, sitting up with its mouth wide open. Then there was an awful sound, like wet meat being shoved through a drain. The woman forced her eyes open. They were nothing but milky, empty orbs, staring into my soul. Suddenly, she swung her rigid legs around to my side. It's a motion I'm very familiar with. She was trying to get up, seeing something snap in my brain, and I ran. I bolted out of the morgue, crashing through the swinging doors. I nearly knocked over a very confused Dave as he walked down the hall with two coffees. I jumped in my car and I peeled out of the hospital's parking lot. I drove down dark city streets, not really knowing where I wanted to go. I almost crashed a few times. Every time I stopped at a light and tried to close my eyes to calm myself down, all I saw was that open, rotting mouth and those empty eyes. Their voices repeated over and over in my head. Killed our son. It didn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure out what the two corpses were implying, but at that moment I was more concerned with whether I was currently in the middle of some sort of psychotic break. But before I even realized what I was doing, I'd stopped the car. The brain fog I'd had since rushing out of the morgue cleared up a bit. I looked around to see where I'd ended up. By the looks of it, I'd parked on a dingy ST, somewhere in the suburbs. Dawn was coming up and faint sunlight was leaking into the night sky. But for the most part, everything was still shrouded in black. I looked at the house I'd stopped in front of, a normal-looking ranch house with a single orange light in the front window. Killed. Our son. Somehow I just knew. It felt like I didn't have control of my own body as I shut the engine down and left the car. I silently walked up the front path to the house's oak door. I knocked on it 3 times with the back of my fist. I wanted to be back in my car, back home in bed. Hell, even back at work with those hideous, grinning corpses. This night had transformed into a horrible nightmare, and I just knew that when whoever was inside the house answered their door, things were only going to get worse for me. Slowly, the door swung open, just a crack behind the door. It was a tired-looking man, probably in his 40s. His eyes were wild, his brow furrowed in suspicion. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. It explained why he was up at 4:30 in the morning. Anyway, it's probably hard to get a good night's sleep after you just murdered your parents. I guess neither one of us was really thinking straight at that moment. Who answers the door for a stranger in the middle of the night? When our eyes locked, a vision began playing in my brain. It was a perfect recreation of what had happened. I saw the old couple, the 2 corpses in my morgue, but alive. They're both laying in bed, elderly and sick, and waiting on their son to take care of them. I saw the man in front of me. He was frustrated and fed up. I saw him placing a pillow over his mother's face, and then when she stopped moving, he walked across the room and did the same to his father. The man's expression changed from suspicion to confusion as he saw my face glaze over. Our eyes were still locked, and it was like I could see him, but also through him as the vision played out in my head. I wondered why he'd done it. I suppose caring for one sick, elderly person takes a lot of something, let alone caring for both of them at once. Or maybe he'd always hated them. The vision I was seeing didn't give any context or explanations, no excuses or justifications. All it showed me was a horrific tragedy playing out to its end. I still had that feeling of being a passenger in my own body as I shouldered my way into the house. It caught the man off guard, and it sent him stumbling back into the foyer. He tried to say something, grabbing at a side table to steady himself. I wasn't a big guy, but the killer was downright puny. I was on top of him, grabbing fistfuls of his matted hair before he could stop me. I don't even know when I started raising my fists up and down, smashing his skull into the floor again and again. At first, between the wet thwacks, I could hear him asking who I was, what I wanted. I didn't even really know the answer to those questions. At that moment, I felt strangely disconnected from the entire thing. I smelled the dark, fresh blood that leaked from the man's crushed skull. The sharp cracking gradually softened as his skull became a lump of jelly. I watched life leave his wide, terrified eyes. But at the same time, it was like I was watching a scene play out on a TV show. I stared at the stranger I'd become. Blood splashed into the air, dotting my arms and face red. Finally, it was done. I released my vice-like grip on the man's hair. His fractured skull dropped into the puddle of blood with a whipped thud. Suddenly, I was back in control. Back in the moment, not just watching it. I staggered backwards, setting myself against the wall. All I could do was sit and stare at what I'd done. What had I done? I was looking at a dead man that I'd just beaten to death with my bare hands, but it didn't really feel like I was the one who did it. I wasn't sure how much of my actions had been under my control from the moment those two bodies started speaking to me. Through the days, I suddenly felt a chill seeping through the air, like that chill I felt in the morgue before this all started. I looked to my left, then to my right. I was still in the man's foyer, but it suddenly seemed so much larger and darker than before. I looked at the man and had to stop a scream. Standing above the dead man, against the dark nothingness the house had become, was the old couple. It was the two rotting corpses that had sent me on this mission. They were here, standing above the body of their son. A too-wide smile was stretched across the woman's face, while the man's face remained blank. They both stared at me. As a black mist began to spill from the bloody, open mouth of their dead son, I watched it rise in small wisps and eventually grew into a hazy, black form in the shape of a human. The woman stepped forward. Each step shook as she used legs that were no longer meant to function. She reached out and caressed the cloudy figure with her hand. Her massive grin somehow grew even wider as she did. By now, there was just a solid wall of black surrounding us. There was no trace of the house that we should be in, and out of this thick darkness, a massive skeletal hand suddenly reached out. I was frozen to the spot. I wondered if I was actually dead myself at this point. I'd take that over being clinically insane. The hand was easily 5 times larger than my own head. It's attached to a bony arm that seemed to stretch forever back into darkness. The fingers ended in sharp claws, and the bones themselves looked dry and rotten, like this thing, whatever it was, had been around for centuries. In one quick motion, the giant claw wrapped closed around the mist creature and dragged it back to where it had come. The man and woman shared one last look into my eyes. The old woman gave me a look that almost looked like gratitude. And then everything snapped back to normal. The skeleton creature, the dead couple, the mist figure. It all disappeared. It was just me and the bloody corpse of the man I just murdered. His body was still there. Dark blood still slowly leaked from his mangled skull. No matter how badly I wanted this to be a dream, the part where I killed him had been real. Finally, I felt like I had control over myself again. I stood and ran from the house, making a beeline for my car. I sped home as fast as I could. I'd call work tomorrow, come up with some excuse why I left early. But what did it matter anyway? I was sure the cops would be waking me up soon and arresting me for a murder. The entire drive home, I was torn between wanting to forget and knowing the full truth of what exactly had just happened. Had I been used to righting some kind of universal wrong? How would I know the vision I'd seen of the man murdering his parents was even true? I stumbled into my apartment, and I collapsed in bed. Thankfully, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep as soon as I closed my eyes. When I woke up hours later, it wasn't because the police were breaking down my door. Instead, my phone was blown up with texts from Dave and my supervisor. I did hope that it was all a nightmare. But one look at the flaking, dried blood that covered me, it was enough proof. I shivered as I remembered that huge skeletal claw emerging from the dark. Several years of being a good employee had earned me some goodwill from management. After I ran out on my last shift, they were more concerned about my well-being than anything else. I quickly made up some excuse about getting food poisoning and apologized for running off. I should have asked to stay home that night. I should have wanted to quit the damn job. But instead, I told them I'd be in that night for my shift no problem, and I thanked them for their concern. I couldn't get that woman's face out of my head. I keep thinking about that look she'd given me. before everything reset itself. Gratitude, gratefulness. When I arrived at the hospital that night, the whole aura of the place felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, like this sense of waiting for something to happen. I didn't pay Dave much attention, but I could feel his stare on the back of my head when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I guessed he was a little suspicious of my story, not that I cared much. Surprisingly, the shift was pretty normal for the first couple hours. We filled up some paperwork, prepped the bodies, and took down any patients that had died upstairs. But that feeling that something's about to happen, it still hung over my head all night. I was deep cleaning some of the tools. When I finally heard it, another raspy voice echoed through the morgue. Hill. This time I didn't react with shock. I pretended I didn't even hear anything. I casually looked at Dave from the corner of my eye. If he could hear the voices now too, he wasn't showing it. Good. I wasn't immediately sure where it was coming from though. Unlike the previous night, there were no fresh bodies waiting out in the open to jump at me. It didn't take me long to figure out where I needed to check the giant wall of stainless steel storage cabinets where we file the corpses away like paperwork. The voice must be coming from one of these. I knew this was where I'd find a body crying out to be heard. I felt that the same force took control of me. I wasn't really in control anymore, but this time I felt a lot calmer about it. I was instantly drawn to a specific cabinet. I logged into this site a few days ago. It was a pretty nasty case. A young guy around my age, whose entire face had been nearly shredded in half. It was determined to be a workplace accident. Sure, an accident, I thought. Killed. I called out to Dave, trying to sound casual. Hey, I'm gonna check on this one from the other day, real quick. Can't remember if I filed the tag correctly. Dave said nothing, simply nodding at me. I opened the drawer. Immediately, I was met with a man's cloudy eyes. They were open, bulging out as they stared at me. They weren't open when I put them in there. I know they weren't. The man's wounds had been pretty bad. He'd fallen face first under the exposed blades of a lawnmower he'd been repairing. His mouth, well, it essentially had been separated from the rest of his face. Deep red gashes ate through his neck and his cheeks directly below those wide, terrified eyes. As I stared down at his mangled face, his jaw began to quiver. The two flopping halves of his face came apart, exposing his chipped teeth and what's left of his tongue. Cute, he said quietly. I could barely understand him. I looked into his eyes, and then I nodded. Pushed, he continued. My boss. I didn't run out of the room in a panic this time. I simply shut the drawer and I went about the rest of my shift. When I clocked out at the crack of dawn, I got in my car and drove. I drove until I arrived. At another normal-looking house that I didn't recognize, I knew there was a man inside who'd done something horrible. This time, I didn't wait in confusion. I knew what I had to do. I smashed a window with my elbow, and I climbed into the house. As I dusted myself off, I saw a portly middle-aged man sleeping in a recliner. A half-empty beer was clutched in one hand. Again, I had a vision. I saw him standing behind the dead man during work. A twisted snarl of rage came over his face as the dead man worked on the lawnmower. Soon, he got the blades running again. He wiped the sweat from his brow and smiled in satisfaction as the lawnmower sputtered to life. Suddenly, the fat man pushed him face first into the whirring blades. A massive spray of red colored the sky and coated the boss. Again, I wondered why, but only for a moment. I guess it didn't really matter. People did horrible things to each other all the time. Those are just the facts. I walked over and grabbed the beer bottle from the sleeping man before I could wake up. I smashed it over his head. He jumped in confusion and pain, nearly falling off the recliner. I took the jagged half of the beer bottle that remained in my hand, and I plunged it into his neck again and again and again, until he stopped moving and gasping. I stepped back and waited. The room went dark. The man with the sliced face appeared, giving me that same look of gratitude. I smiled at him. The misty smoke figure rose from the fat man's mouth. I'm still not completely sure what it is. His essence, his soul, his crime, maybe a manifestation of the evil he'd done. Then, from the darkness, the hand appeared, that bony arm connected to something from beyond our world. It reached out and grabbed the mist. I tried to really study it this time, really try and get a better look. It seemed to linger just a little bit longer this time, almost like it was waiting for me, like it wanted me to see. Then it was gone. Everything was gone, and I was alone again with a corpse. There were so many others that needed me to listen. The garbage man who'd murdered his sister. I pushed him into a compactor. I watched as his body splintered and snapped. There was the librarian who wanted her husband's insurance money. I smashed her skull with an extra large encyclopedia. On and on and on. Each time I was guided by the hand, it would emerge when the deed was done and grab at those wispy figures. I knew what it was. I'd spent so much time thinking about it. It wasn't a demon or some kind of creature from hell. It was the hand of karma, of destiny. And I was their eyes. For some reason, it had chosen me to carry out justice. I never found out why it chose me, but it spoke to me through the corpses, at first, at least. That's only because that was the easiest way to reach me back then. You see, I quit my job at the hospital this past week. I don't need it anymore. Not after I saw that monstrous hand appear over a woman's head in broad daylight, and instantly, I saw a picture-perfect vision of what she'd done to her mother. I followed her into an alley, and I did what I was supposed to do. I had earned its trust. It doesn't need the corpses anymore. Now, it can appear to me whenever it needs to send me after whoever it wants. It shows me all the awful things you're all doing, the horrible messes you lead me to find, and how you should be punished. And when it speaks to me, I do what I do best. I listen. My new job has some very strange rules. I remember my first day as a school bus driver. Even back then, I knew how important this job was. And then I found out what happened to the kids on Bus 10. And that's when I realized that following the rules can be the difference between life and death. It was my first day of the new gig. I was sitting in the driver's seat of bus number 9 at the depot. I was feeling a weird mix of excitement and nerves. You see, I used to be a paramedic. Yeah, rushing into chaos, saving lives, the whole shebang. But after years on the job, seeing things you can't unsee, I needed a change. Something, less heart-pounding. Plus, with my kid off to college, the house was just too quiet. I missed having him around. The laughter, the endless questions, all the dinosaur talk, that sort of thing. So when the school district posted a job for a bus driver, I thought, why not? Kids are cool. And how hard could driving a bus be? So I sat there checking out the bus controls, and that's when Mr. Harlan, the guy I was taking over for, got on. He was this tough, lean guy who'd been driving longer than I'd been in emergency services. But his eyes were kind, like he'd been through everything and still managed to keep his smile. "Joey, right?" he said. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, shaking his hand. "I'm excited to start. Do you have any tips for a newbie?" Mr. Harlan nodded. He took a seat next to me as his gaze drifted over the bus, as if saying goodbye to an old friend. "This job, it's different, Joy. It's not just about getting from point A to point B. These kids, they become yours in a way. You're the first hello and the last goodbye. It's important, he said, and nodded, understanding more than he realized. Being a paramedic taught me about how fragile life was, how important every hello and goodbye was. Then he leaned closer as he lowered his voice. "There's something else," he added, taking a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "Bus number 9, it's different, and there are rules. Stick to them, protect the kids, and you'll be okay." I laughed. "What kind of rules can a bus have?" I asked. Mr. Harlan didn't laugh, though. Instead, he unfolded the paper and handed it to me. "Memorize these. I'm not joking, Joey. I've driven this route for over 20 years. These rules, they're not official. They're not something the district will tell you. But they're important. Follow them and you'll avoid trouble." I took the paper, full of curiosity. The rules were weird, to say the least. Number 1, never look in the rearview mirror when the bus is empty. Number 2, on rainy days, do not pick up any kids you don't know. Number 3, remember every child's name. Number 4, only let 3 children in on stop 8. Number 5, do not accept gifts from the children. Number 6, have the last child on the bus lie down until they leave. And number 7, never leave the bus during your route. I raised an eyebrow looking back at Mr. Harlan. All right, this is some kind of initiation prank for the new guy. He shook his head. His expression was dead serious. I wish it was, Joey. I really do. But you'll see. Just trust me on this, okay? He said. There was a weight in his voice, a sincerity that you couldn't ignore. I nodded, folding the paper and tucking it back into my pocket. All right, Mr. Harlan, I'll take your word for it, I said. He clapped me on the shoulder and started to leave. Good. And enjoy. One more thing. The kids, they'll look up to you. Be there for them. Sometimes. Well, you might be the only stable thing they've got. Harlan's words echoed in my head. Was that why these rules were so important to him? Because it was something the kids needed. I read over the list again, and it was the rule about remembering every kid's name that caught my attention. I thought that was doable. I was good with names. So I decided right then, first things first, I was going to make sure I knew all the kids by name. It seemed like a good way to break the ice too. You know, being the new guy and all. So as the kids boarded the bus, I greeted each one. I introduced myself and I asked for their names. Their responses were a mix of shy mumbles and cheerful introductions. By the time we were near the school, I had a mental roster going. The trip to Einstein Elementary was just like any other school route. Each street was full of neat houses and nice lawns. It was the sort of area where neighbors probably knew each other, borrowed sugar, or threw block parties in the summer. It was picture perfect. And the kids were just full of life. They talked about homework, video games, and whatever else they were into. Their excitement was contagious. I caught myself smiling more than I thought I would. It was a nice break from the high-stress world of being a paramedic. No rush or adrenaline, no critical decisions. Just a straightforward job of making sure these kids got to school safely. The trip to Einstein Elementary went by smooth as butter. The school was a nice red brick building with a large sign out front welcoming everyone. I watched the kids get off with their colorful backpacks one by one. A lot of them even waved goodbye to me as they hopped off. When the last kid got off the bus, I felt really good about what I'd done. It was only the first day, but I already felt like I was part of their lives, even just in a small way. I was just the bus driver, but maybe, just maybe, I could be the steady presence Harlan mentioned. After the kids were dropped off, I spent the rest of the day at the bus depot while the kids were at school. I helped around in the dispatcher's office, spent most of the day doing paperwork, and learning about the other routes. It was the sort of admin work I hadn't really expected when I took the job, but it wasn't too bad. I had my lunch break in the lounge for us drivers. It was just me, a sandwich, and a bag of chips. It was quiet and actually pretty nice. But while I was having lunch, a dispatcher came in looking pretty torn up. She said that Mr. Harlan had been in a car accident that morning, right after he met me. He didn't survive. The news shocked me. I only just met him, but knowing how he was suddenly gone, it really affected me. I kept thinking about how he used his last moments to make sure I knew the rules, about looking after the kids on my route. His words felt more important than ever now. For the rest of my lunch break, I just sat there and wasn't hungry anymore. I kept thinking about Harlan, how much he cared about those kids. As the afternoon came, it was time to hop on the bus again and pick the kids up from school. I couldn't help but feel some sadness as I started the engine. Harlan's death affected me more than I thought, but I had a responsibility. I had kids to safely return home. I thought the best way to pay tribute to Harlan was to be the best bus driver possible for these kids. The afternoon round was all right. I was starting to get the hang of this, I thought. I was proud of myself as I called most of the kids by their names when they boarded the bus. They seemed to like that. Some even smiled or nodded at me, which felt nice. It's the little things that matter, right? As we made our way through the stops, the bus gradually emptied. The noise level dropped with each group of kids that left. Before I knew it, we were down to the last kid. He was a short orange-haired boy, sitting right near the front. Patrick Hooper, I think his name was. I noticed him glancing around every now and then, watching as his friends left one by one, and then it was just him on the bus. As soon as he was alone, he lay down across the seat. The sun was going down, and his house was still a long way off. I guessed he was just worn out from the day. School can really tire a kid out, or maybe he had stayed up too late the night before. I glanced over, expecting to see him dozing off, but instead I saw that he looked more scared than tired. His eyes were wide open, darting around as if he expected something to jump out from the empty seats. "Hey, buddy, is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Long day," he nodded. Yeah, just tired." But the way he said it didn't quite match the look in his eyes. I remembered the rule about having the last kid lie down until they leave, seeing it in action. It made me uneasy, especially since the kid looked so scared. What was he scared of? Mr. Harlan's rules flashed through my mind, and I suddenly wished I'd asked more about them. I kept my eyes on the road, looking at the boy in the rearview mirror. "Hey, just a little longer and you'll be home," I said. The kid just nodded again, staying flat on the seat. I focused on getting him home as quickly and safely as possible. We finally reached the boy's house, a cozy-looking place with a porch light that cut through the dark. Patrick got up quickly, like he couldn't wait to get out of there. "Thank you, Mr. Joey," he said. As he stepped off the bus, he paused and looked back at me. I hope that Mr. Harlan didn't feel any pain and that he's watching over the bus now. His words hit me like a cold splash of water. How did he know about Harlan? "Hey, how did you?" I started to ask, but he was already running towards his house, not looking back. The door opened and swallowed him up before I could get any answers, and I sat there for a moment, trying to wrap my head around what just happened. How could he know about Harlan? The news had barely spread, and it's not like I mentioned it to the kids. I pulled away from the curb, Harlan's words echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe Harlan was still keeping an eye on things, or maybe it was the kids' way of dealing with the bad news. The drive back to the depot was dead quiet. I kept thinking about the boy's words about Harlan, and about the list of rules in my pocket. The next morning I woke up with a sense of purpose. "Morning, Sarah." "Hey there, Luke." "How's it going, Maya?" I greeted each child by name as they boarded the bus. It felt good, like I was building my own little community. "I've got this," I thought to myself. And then Stop 8 came up. I remembered the 3 kids who got on from yesterday. James, Ellie, and Marcus. Easy. But today I noticed someone new. A girl in blonde pigtails standing a bit away from the others. She wore a muddy blue raincoat and kept her head down. I hesitated, remembering the rules. Only 3 kids from Stop 8, but here was a 4th, looking like she needed to get on. The rain had started to pick up, and she seemed so alone there in her muddy coat. I couldn't just leave a kid behind, right? That was my whole job. "Come on then," I called out to her, trying to sound cheerful as the 3 regulars from Stop 8 got on the bus. I noticed the blonde girl just standing there, not moving forward. "Come on, it's okay, you can come in," I said, trying to encourage her. She gave a slight nod but kept her head down. She slowly made her way onto the bus. That's when Patrick spoke up, the orange-haired kid from yesterday. "Mr. Joey, you have to close the doors and drive now." He said he sounded worried and scared. The bus filled with loud cries as the other kids started to panic too. "Go, go," they yelled, some standing, some holding onto their backpacks as if they were the only thing keeping them safe. The noise level rose as kids started to talk over each other, some crying, others yelling at me to go. Confused by the commotion, I began to calm Patrick and the rest down. I told them everything was fine and we just couldn't leave someone. But then Patrick pointed out something I missed. "Mr. Joey, look, she doesn't have a backpack. Please go." "She's not one of us," he said, his eyes filled with tears. With the kids crying, I made a split-second decision. It was against every instinct I had, but I shut the door. I could feel the tension start to drop as soon as I started driving away. I saw the kids calming down as I checked on them through the rearview mirror. They were all huddling together, comforting each other. The rest of the ride was quiet, and I was shaken deeply. Watching those kids panic like that hit me hard. I kept thinking about the girl we left behind and the fear in the kids' eyes. As soon as I got back to the depot, I knew I needed to find out more. I parked the bus and headed straight for the dispatcher's office. My mind was racing with questions. Walking around the depot, I felt more weighed down every time another driver brushed me off. They all seemed to believe the kids were just messing with a new guy, but I couldn't stop thinking about how scared Patrick looked. How could fear really be a prank? Feeling annoyed about the whole thing, I decided to go right to the head administrator. I wanted to have a serious talk. I explained everything, the list of rules, how weirdly the kids were acting, and what happened with the blonde girl. But instead of getting the explanation I was hoping for, all I got was a warning. She told me that if I ever left a child behind again, I'd lose my job. I felt even lonelier leaving her office, but when I picked up the kids that afternoon, things seemed back to normal. The laughter, the chatter, the usual buzz of energy filled the bus as I drove. I allowed myself to relax, thinking maybe everything would be okay after all. The route went by without any incidents. I dropped everyone off one by one until it was just me and Patrick again. Just like the last time, the kid lay down on his seat as soon as the other kids were gone. His body was tense, and I could see his eyes darting around. I couldn't just drive on, pretending I hadn't noticed. "Patrick, why do you do that, ma'am?" "Lie down, I mean." He looked up at me, his expression a mix of fear and relief that somebody finally asked. "It's so no one sits next to me," he whispered. Who? Who are you talking about, Patrick?" I pushed gently, needing to understand. He hesitated, then said the kids from Bus 10 and the girl in the blue raincoat. "She's from Bus 10. Bus 10. I racked my brain, trying to remember if I'd ever seen or heard of Bus 10 around these parts. Nothing came to mind. Before I could ask Patrick anything else, we got to a stop. He jumped off and quickly said, "Be careful tomorrow, it's going to rain." And that made me even more curious. I nodded to him, then drove off, my mind racing. Going back to the depot, I thought about the rules. The rule about rainy days and not picking up kids I don't recognize really hit me, especially after what Patrick had said. But then the administrator's warning to never leave any kids behind complicated things. Deep in thought, a quiet noise brought me back to reality. I looked down to see a marble rolling down the aisle toward me. I thought maybe someone had forgotten it, but when I stopped at a red light, a cough from the back of the bus made me freeze. Remembering the rule about not looking in the rearview mirror when the bus is empty, I fought the urge to look. Instead, I turned to face the empty seats. I jumped a little. A few rows behind me, I saw feet sticking out into the aisle. I was certain it was a kid, but it was someone I didn't recognize. I could see how thin and pale their legs were. "Hey there, you missed your stop, bud. I'll take you back," I said. But something wasn't right. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I realized the kid wasn't wearing shoes. Their feet were bare, but they were so caked in mud it was hard to tell at first. Something about it seemed very off. I couldn't just head back to the depot with the kids still on the bus. I had to bring them home. So I pulled over to the side of the road, leaving the engine running quietly as I got up to check. As I walked down the aisle, my steps felt heavy. When I finally got to where the kid was sitting, my heart stopped. There was no kid, just an empty seat covered in mud, and sitting in the middle of it was a neat pile of marbles stained with blood. Getting home later, I just couldn't stop thinking about everything that happened, especially what Patrick said about Bus 10. My curiosity wouldn't let up, so I turned on my old laptop to see what I could find. Pretty soon I found a newspaper article dating back 40 years. It turns out there was a horrible accident with Bus 10. The driver had been drinking and crashed the bus. According to the report, the bus swerved off the road during a big storm. One child was taken to the hospital. The rest didn't make it. I remembered my days as a paramedic. That sort of thing sticks with you, especially when there's kids. But what really made me think was the rules. How did this all tie together? And why is my bus the only one that has them? It was pouring hard the next morning. The rain came down in sheets. I got soaked just standing on my porch, but I still had a job to do. I was going to be there for those kids and make sure they got to school safe. So I drove my route, picking up each one. The rain got worse with each stop. When I pulled up the Patrick stop, I could see he was scared. I spotted a few kids huddled behind him. Some of them were shivering under umbrellas. While the rest held on to their raincoats, Patrick was a bit off to the side, all by himself. He rushed onto the bus, soaked and shivering. "I'm the only one at this stop," Patrick said as soon as he got on. He nervously glanced back at the group of kids still waiting in the rain. "We got to go, mister." "Joey, please." But I remembered what the administrator had said about not leaving kids behind. Looking at the group of kids on the curb, they looked just like any other children waiting for the bus. They didn't seem odd or out of place, just wet and probably cold. Maybe their regular bus hasn't picked them up yet. Patrick was almost begging me by then, his voice desperate, in a way that was tough to ignore, but I couldn't just leave. I looked at Patrick and I shrugged. "Sorry, buddy, I got a job to do." No kid gets left behind. I moved closer to the open door and shouted to the kids still in the rain. "Come on, you'll catch a cold out there," trying to sound braver than I actually was. As soon as those new kids stepped on the bus, everything felt different. The usual morning chatter and laughter died down, and a heavy silence filled the air. I kept driving, trying to focus on the road ahead, but the atmosphere felt off. Then it began. At first, there was a quiet whimpering, which then got louder. I couldn't just ignore it. I turned and saw several kids, my kids, crying. Some were clinging to each other for comfort, while others were hugging their knees close. My heart dropped, seeing Patrick all curled up, his face hidden in his hands, terrified. Right beside him was one of the new boys, a boy with dark, messy hair and glasses. There was nothing obviously wrong about him, but as soon as I saw him, I felt nauseous, like I was going to be sick right there. The kid caught me looking at him and smiled at me, perfectly innocent. All of a sudden, a loud honk snapped me back to focus. I looked away from the road for a bit too long and almost hit something. I quickly steered the bus back on course, and I took a deep breath to settle down. Okay, that was way too close. I knew I couldn't get distracted again, especially not while driving. The crying from the back didn't stop, though. The drive got harder every minute. The rain was pouring so heavily it felt like trying to look through a waterfall. Even with the windshield wipers going full speed behind me, the crying had turned into loud sobs. It was tough to listen to, especially since I couldn't do much about it while needing to stay focused. But among the crying, I started hearing whispers, kids saying things to each other like, "Don't look, just don't look at them," and "You won't get taken if you just close your eyes." It made no sense, but the fear in their voices was real. And then, in the middle of all the panic and crying, somebody started laughing. It felt so sudden and out of place. I just had to look. The new kid with dark hair was laughing quietly. In another situation, it might have been calming, but right then it just seemed wrong. He was gently touching Patrick's hair. Patrick, meanwhile, stayed curled up, resembling a frightened animal more than a child headed to school. Looking at the boy made me feel dizzy again, so I turned my eyes back to the road. As I did, I heard a kid yell out, "I don't want to die," coupled with more loud sobbing. That was it for me. Hey, nobody's going to die, especially not from a little rain," I said a bit louder than I meant to. That's when Patrick finally said something. "How much longer till we get to school, mister?" "Joey?" he asked. That's when I realized. The drive was dragging on. We should have been at school by now. "Where are we now?" Patrick asked next, sounding worried. I wanted to answer him, but I couldn't. I looked out the windows, trying to work out where we were. What I saw made me feel sick. We were still on Patrick St. That made no sense. I've been driving for ages, but it looked like we hadn't gone anywhere. Patrick's voice, quiet but urgent, broke through my panic. "Mister, Joey, look at the rearview mirror." And without even thinking, I did. I looked up, and in the mirror, there was something very wrong with the new kids. Their clothes were bloody and torn, glasses broken, missing shoes, ripped out hair. Many had injuries that made it hard to even look at them. Each one was sitting beside one of the regular kids, the ones I recognized. They were the kids who were all curled up or had their faces covered. I saw one of them lean over from the seat behind me, a boy with one green eye left. He smiled and he placed a bloody stump on my shoulder. I felt something warm running down my shoulder. Patrick's next words came as a whisper, but they hit me like a truck. After the accident, they didn't scrap the bus, mister. Joe, they just changed the numbers. This is bus 10 and the kids from that crash. They want it back. Another loud honk pulled my focus from the rear view mirror into the road. I almost clipped the car. How was I still on Patrick St? After driving so long, yet nearly hit another car. And that's when I just knew the kids from bus 10 weren't just here to scare us. They were keeping us stuck on the street. In this never-ending rain trying to make us crash, I try not to panic. I needed to keep everyone safe. I wasn't going to let any of these kids get hurt because of me. And then suddenly a figure appeared in the middle of the road. It looked like a man wearing a bright orange raincoat. He was waving both of his arms above his head, as if telling me to stop. I hit the brakes hard just in time, and looking through the rain-drenched windshield, I caught my breath. It was Mr. Harlan. As soon as the bus stopped, Mr. Harlan walked to the door. I opened it quickly, still stunned. He got on, rainwater dripping off him. He went straight to the front and faced the boy sitting next to Patrick. Scooter, now leave him alone. He ain't yours to take, he said sternly. And then Mr. Harlan looked at everyone else on the bus. Nice to see you all again. Sorry, it took me a while to join you guys, he said. It took me a moment to understand what he meant, and then it clicked. Mr. Harlan. He was the student who survived that crash all those years ago. Mr. Harlan faced the kids from bus 10, speaking in a calm, steady voice. Let everyone go, he told them. I'll be the bus driver from now on, so we'll all be together again, and it won't be like the last time. I'll keep everyone safe. That's a promise. Then he looked at me. Joey, take your kids and get off the bus. You remember who they are, right? I nodded. I memorized each of their names like he told me to. I would have done it if no one asked me to anyway. I walked down the aisle, calling out to each kid by their name, the ones I'd learned and remembered. Sarah, come on, Jake, let's go. Emily, it's time. One by one, I took their hands, guiding them off the bus, making sure not to leave anyone behind. Finally, it was just me left on the bus with Mr. Harlan. He put a hand on my shoulder. It was cold, and it didn't feel like it was all there. Joey, I'll bring the bus back home after I take these kids home. And remember, there's one rule all bus drivers must follow, and it's the most important one of all. I think you know what it is. I nodded in understanding before I stepped off the bus, and there they were, all the kids standing outside together, clutching their backpacks. They all looked relieved, almost like they couldn't believe they were safe. I looked around and I saw we were right by Patrick's house. I looked back at the bus and saw Mr. Harlan in the driver's seat. Looking like he was about to leave, he caught my eye, winked at me, and then closed the door. The bus started moving, and I watched as the bus with Mr. Harlan and the kids from bus 10 disappeared into the rainy, dark afternoon. I felt the tug on my arm, and I looked down to see Patrick. Let's go inside my house to keep warm. Mom won't mind, he said over the rain. I smiled at him, thankful for his help. As we walked towards his house, I took out my phone to start calling some parents. The rain was pouring like it was a hurricane. I had a feeling school was canceled today, but I still had a job to do. I had to follow Harlan's final rule, the most important one of all. Protect the kids.